twilight over Rome. Bruised plum and fevered ochre stained the Roman firmament, a reflection of the discord churning within Marcus Aurelius. From the crest of the Palatine, the sprawling metropolis lay spread before him, a mosaic of russet rooftops and ivory monuments. Normally, such a view inspired pride. Tonight, it felt like a vice, tightening around his spirit. The air, heavy with the day's lingering heat, hung in breathless anticipation. His hand, a roadmap of wrinkles and worry lines, sought solace on the cool marble of the balustrade. The elongated shadows cast by the dying sun amplified the furrows on his face, each a testament to choices made, battles endured, a life lived under the relentless glare of power. Rome. His Rome. Their Rome. The possessive thought, usually resisted, pounded in his skull. He was merely its caretaker, not its lord. Yet, the sheer weight of its survival pressed upon him, threatening to extinguish the very spark he nurtured through stoic tenets. A wave of profound weariness crashed over him, a bone-deep exhaustion that transcended the physical. He yearned for the uncluttered simplicity of youth, when the world's burdens rested on broader shoulders. He craved the undisturbed quiet of philosophical pursuit, not the incessant demands of leadership, the endless stream of supplications, the ever-present threat of barbarian incursions. Was this the essence of emperorship? To remain perpetually burdened, eternally vigilant, forever sacrificing personal serenity for the sake of the collective? He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, striving for equilibrium. The familiar verses of Epictetus echoed in his mind, a bulwark against the encroaching despair. Control your mind, not external events. Yet, even ancient wisdom offered scant consolation this night. The turmoil within mirrored the tempest brewing on the horizon. He opened his eyes, compelled by the drama unfolding above. The sky's palette had deepened, the ochre surrendered to crimson, staining the clouds with what appeared to be arterial blood. An unseen energy thrummed in the air, a palpable tension raising gooseflesh on his neck. Then he witnessed it, the initial, tentative flashes of lightning, remote glimmers igniting the dark underbelly of the approaching storm clouds. They pirouetted along the horizon like malevolent sprites, precursors of chaos. He had stared down legions, navigated treacherous political currents, and weathered personal calamities with unwavering stoicism. But tonight, poised on the edge of a cataclysm, both literal and metaphorical, he felt a rawness he rarely permitted himself to recognize. His gaze drifted towards the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline, its gleaming marble columns stark against the gathering gloom. His thoughts turned to sacrifices made, prayers offered for deliverance and guidance. Had the gods forsaken them? The question, intrusive and unwelcome, surfaced unbidden. He immediately chastised himself. Such notions stemmed from weakness, from a mind succumbing to fear. He forced his focus onto practicalities. The tempest would unleash floods, disrupt commerce, and potentially damage crucial city infrastructure. He needed to alert the Praefectus Vigilum, ensure the city watchmen were on high alert, and arrange provisions for displaced citizens. Duty calls, he mused, the familiar mantra a shield against the encroaching darkness. He turned from the balustrade, his movements slower, heavier than usual. He would gather his advisors, analyze the situation, and craft a strategy. He would revert to form, embrace the responsibility, confront the challenge, and endeavor to maintain equilibrium amidst the chaos. As he strode towards the palace, a sudden gust of wind swirled around him, carrying the earthy aroma of rain and the distant growl of thunder. It was a primal resonance, a reminder of the untamed forces lurking beyond civilization's veneer. He paused, glancing back at the city, now draped in deepening shadows. The first heavy raindrops began to fall, splattering the marble paving stones. Rome, he thought, a blend of affection and resignation coloring his heart. You are a fickle mistress. And I, your exhausted servant. He entered the palace, the imposing doors sealing shut behind him with a resounding boom, trapping the tempest outside, though not its internal counterpart. The Praetorian Guard stood rigidly, their faces impassive, their spears glinting in the corridor's dim light. He gave them a curt nod, his mind already mapping out the tasks ahead. He discovered Commodus in the library, surrounded by scrolls, though his glazed expression betrayed a lack of engagement. The young man was reclining on a chaise lounge, idly strumming a lyre. "Father," Commodus murmured, without looking up. "The air feels pregnant. I sense a storm coming." "Indeed," Marcus responded, his tone devoid of inflection. "And not just in the sky." Commodus finally met his gaze, a spark of curiosity flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? I mean that Rome perpetually teeters on the precipice, Commodus. It's the nature of dominion, the essence of empire. There are always forces seeking to undermine, to challenge, to dismantle. Commodus shrugged. Let them try. We command the legions. Legions alone are insufficient, Marcus countered, his voice gaining an edge. An empire thrives not on might alone, but on judicious rule, equitable governance, and the assent of the governed. Commodus scoffed. Assent. The populace craves sustenance and diversion, not justice. Marcus sighed, the familiar wave of disappointment washing over him. He had striven to instill the virtues of stoicism in his son, emphasizing prudence and self-restraint. However, Commodus appeared impervious to his teachings, prioritizing pleasure and self-glorification over the burdens of leadership. Remember well, Commodus, that even the most formidable empire can crumble from within. Neglect, venality, inequity, these are Rome's true adversaries. Are we to endure yet another lecture, father? Commodus asked, his tone laced with petulance. I endeavor to prepare you, Marcus replied, his voice tinged with weariness. One day, you will inherit the mantle of emperor. And more than just legions will be required to secure this realm. Commodus rolled his eyes. I know. Virtue, justice, moderation. I've absorbed it all before. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, suppressing the rising tide of frustration. He knew his words resonated on barren soil. Still, he could not surrender. He owed it to Rome, to himself, to exert every effort to guide his son towards the path of righteousness. The storm is imminent, Commodus, he said, his voice gentler now. Be prepared. He turned and exited the library, leaving Commodus alone with his lyre and his apathy. He summoned his council to the war room, a large, sparsely furnished space dominated by a colossal map of the Roman Empire. Flickering oil lamps cast elongated, dancing shadows upon the walls. Pertinax, the praefectus vigilum, was already present, his expression grave. The storm intensifies, Caesar. The winds gather force, and rain descends in torrents. We have already received reports of inundations in the lower sectors. Have you deployed the watchmen? Marcus inquired. Yes, Caesar. They are securing thoroughfares, assisting those in need, and guarding against opportunistic thieves. Good, Marcus affirmed. Instruct the grain merchants to unlock their stores to the public. We must ensure that none suffer from hunger this night. Yes, Caesar, Pertinax replied, bowing his head. The remaining advisors arrived, their countenances etched with concern. They debated the potential devastation the storm could unleash, the strategies needed to mitigate the impact, and the resources required for the recovery effort. Marcus listened attentively, posing queries, offering direction, and rendering decisions with his customary composed efficiency. He was adept at crisis management, a veteran administrator who had mastered the art of navigating the treacherous currents of Roman statecraft with elegance and sagacity. Yet, beneath the facade, the exhaustion lingered. He felt akin to a vessel buffeted by unyielding tempests, its sails shredded, its hull compromised, its captain struggling to maintain buoyancy. He surveyed his advisors, their faces illuminated by the flickering lamplight. They were steadfast, competent men, yet also flawed, driven by ambition, and prone to internecine squabbles. He surmised they were perpetually vying for advantage, currying his favor, and scheming against their rivals. Did they genuinely grasp the magnitude of the burden he bore, the sacrifices he made, the compromises he was forced to countenance? Did they comprehend that he was more than their emperor, but also a man, with personal longings, personal anxieties, personal uncertainties? He doubted it. To them, he represented a symbol, an icon, a personification. They beheld him as the embodiment of Roman authority, not as a human being endeavoring to comprehend a turbulent existence. The gathering stretched late into the night, the tempest raging outside, the tension palpable within the chamber. Finally, as the initial tendrils of dawn began to pierce the darkness, Marcus dismissed his counselors. He remained alone in the war room, the map of the Roman dominion spread out before him like an immense, intricate jigsaw. He scrutinized it, his eyes tracing the frontiers, the arteries of communication, the urban centers, the far-flung outposts. A profound sense of solitude enveloped him, an isolation that had haunted him during his reign. He was the emperor of Rome, the most powerful individual on earth. But he was also isolated, confined within a gilded cage, shackled by obligations no one else could fully shoulder. He closed his eyes, uttering the dictum of Marcus Porcius Cato, "I am alone, and yet not alone, for I am with myself." But even Cato's wisdom offered little consolation this night. He was fatigued, he was worn, he was longing for respite. He opened his eyes and gazed out the window. The storm had waned, leaving a city cleansed, gleaming in the morning's first blush. The air felt invigorating and clear, the sky a shimmering azure. Yet, the tempest within him persisted, a crucible of unease, trepidation, and incertitude that threatened to engulf him. He knew he must not yield. He had sworn fealty to Rome, sworn allegiance to his people, sworn an oath to himself. He must summon the strength to persevere, to confront every challenge that lay ahead, to endure until his final breath. He inhaled deeply, fortifying himself for the coming day. He would grapple with the storm's aftermath, he would address the needs of his citizens, he would continue to govern with prudence and fairness. He would do what he always did, embrace the obligation, confront the trial, and strive to maintain equilibrium amidst the chaos. He was Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome. And he would not waver. Not yet. The Emperor's Journal. The tempest raged, a furious orchestra of wind and rain battering against the windows of Marcus's sanctuary. Each buffet resonated like bony fingers drumming a frantic rhythm. At his desk, lamplight threw jagged figures against the walls, mirroring the discord within his heart. He reached for the journal, the familiar grain of its aged leather a comfort beneath his fingertips. The bronze clasp, a humble guardian, gave way with a quiet snap, liberating years of carefully guarded thoughts. It was a mosaic crafted from fragments snatched from the jaws of empire. Dried blossoms, ghosts of color from his beloved Lorium villa, rested between fragile leaves. Elsewhere, hurried sketches captured fleeting impressions from the forum, a pensive senator, a merchant's animated haggle, a mother's gentle reassurance. Meticulously rendered maps detailed the empire's sprawling borders, Rhine, Danube, Parthia, each stroke a testament to ceaseless vigilance. But primarily, the journal held his handwriting. Elegant lines filled page after page, a confluence of philosophy, introspection, and practical counsel for a life of virtue. The ink's varied tone spoke of circumstance and season. Some pronouncements were bold, forged in moments of crystalline clarity. Others wavered, revealing the doubts that shadowed even an emperor. His thumb traced a passage penned during northern campaigns, the soul remains untouched by circumstance, possessing the power to reshape all things according to its own judgment. Memories flooded back, the icy wind, the unyielding rain, the constant threat of barbarian incursion. These words had been his anchor, yet now, they echoed with a hollow resonance. Exhaling a sigh burdened with the weight of Rome, Marcus picked up his quill. A simple reed, sharpened with care, a gift from Fronto, his old mentor. He dipped it into the inkwell, the viscous fluid clinging to the nib like a solemn pledge. He hesitated, the quill poised above the pristine page, and closed his eyes, seeking the quiet voice of reason, the inner guide that had served him faithfully for so long. Tonight, it was a whisper, almost silenced by the internal and external storm. He began to write, shadows deepen, aping the sunset of my years. Each sundown feels like a loss, a jewel plucked from my meager store of remaining time. I find myself increasingly reliant on this journal, my silent confidant, a vessel for thoughts too treacherous to utter aloud. Commodus. The name weighs on my spirit like lead. How can a son nurtured on virtue, steeped in ancient wisdom, prove so deficient? He wears the guise of a man, but not the soul. He chases fleeting pleasures, not enduring purpose. He demands adulation, not respect. I have striven to guide him, to mold his character, to imbue him with the principles that have fortified me through trials of empire. Yet, my efforts dissipate like water on parched earth, absorbed without effect. Am I culpable? Have I failed as a father? The Stoics assert that virtue is the sole good, vice the only evil. Yet, I cannot escape the weight of responsibility for my son's character. Did I overshield him from the world's harsh realities? Did I indulge his every whim, mistaking affection for proper guidance? Perhaps the imperial purple has corrupted him, fostering arrogance and entitlement within his very core. The Senate, they observe him, scrutinize him, their faces reflecting barely concealed apprehension. They recall Caligula. They mutter of Nero. Rome's stability teeters precariously, and Commodus, with his rash ambition and thirst for spectacle, threatens to plunge us all into ruin. I have contemplated naming another successor. Pertinax, perhaps. Or even Severus. Men of proven competence, men of unswerving loyalty. But such a move would unleash civil war, tearing the empire asunder and inviting enemies across our borders. The price would be paid in torrents of blood, in the anguish of countless innocents. Can I, in good conscience, subject Rome to such a fate? The yoke of duty, a relentless taskmaster. It demands sacrifice, compromise, the perpetual suppression of personal longing. I yearn for the simple life of a philosopher, for the quiet pursuit of wisdom and virtue. Yet, such luxuries are denied to emperors. My devotion lies with Rome, with its people, with the preservation of peace and order. This commitment eclipses all personal considerations. Yet, I confess, the burden is almost unbearable. The ceaseless petitions, the intricate machinations, the looming specter of war, they erode the very essence of the soul, leaving it scarred and weary. I find myself seeking solace in the teachings of Epictetus, his emphasis on acceptance and detachment. Do not strive to make events conform to your will, but rather align your will with events as they unfold, and your life will prosper. Easier proclaimed than achieved. The storm persists. A fitting allegory for the turbulence threatening to engulf Rome. I must find strength, not in might or position, but in the principles that have sustained me. I must accept the inevitable, and concentrate on the controllable, my thoughts, my actions, my pursuit of virtue. Tomorrow, I will meet with Commodus. I will address him, not as an emperor, but as a father. I will implore him to embrace his responsibilities, to rise to the occasion of leadership, to become the man I know he is capable of being. I recognize the odds stacked against me. I know he may disregard my counsel. But I must endeavor. For Rome's sake. For my son's sake. For the sake of my own conscience. And if I fail, then I must brace Rome for what lies ahead. I must ensure that, even in death, the tenets of justice, reason, and virtue continue to guide the empire. I must leave a legacy that will inspire future generations to strive toward a more enlightened world. The hour is late. The lamp flickers, nearly spent. I must rest. Tomorrow, dawn will break, ushering in a new day of challenges and duties. May the gods grant me the fortitude to confront them with courage, wisdom, and unwavering fidelity. I am but a ripple in an expansive ocean. Yet, even a small wave can shape coastlines, and carry life to distant shores. I must embody that wave. I must endeavor to leave a positive mark on the world, however slight, before being swallowed by the sea from which I emerged. Perhaps that is all that truly matters. Not power, not acclaim, not even remembrance. But simply the striving to live a virtuous life, to contribute to the common good, to leave the world incrementally better than one found it. He paused, the quill still poised in his grasp, and gazed out at the raging storm. A lightning flash lit up the sky, revealing roiling, dark clouds. An overwhelming sense of isolation washed over him, a feeling of being utterly alone against insurmountable odds. Then, he recalled the words of Cato, "Only speak when you are sure your words improve upon the silence." He re-dipped his quill and resumed writing, impermanence. The bedrock truth of existence. All fades. All transforms. Empires rise and fall. Mountains erode. Stars extinguish. Even the gods are not immune to the relentless currents of time. I have dedicated my life to erecting something enduring, something that would transcend my own mortality. Yet, perhaps it is a futile pursuit. Perhaps the only true legacy lies in the impact we exert on the lives of others. The compassion we extend. The wisdom we impart. The love we offer. I reflect on my wife, Faustina. Her beauty, her grace, her unyielding support. She was my life's anchor, the beacon that led me through the darkest nights. Her passing left an emptiness that can never be bridged. But her memory endures, a constant reminder of love's power and the importance of cherishing every moment with those we hold dear. I was not always a good husband. My imperial obligations often kept me distant, depriving her of the attention and affection she merited. I lament those lost moments, those squandered opportunities to express my love. But I find solace in knowing she felt my devotion. I hope, in some form, she watches over me now, guiding me from beyond. And my children. Lucilla, Fadila, Ania. I have striven to be a good father, to instill the values that will aid them in navigating life's complexities. but I worry for their futures. The world is treacherous, and they will confront trials and temptations beyond my imagining. I pray they will possess the strength to resist vice's allure and to remain true to themselves. Commodus. I still harbor hope for him. I still believe some good resides within him, however deeply buried. I must reach him, before it is too late. I must ignite the ember of virtue that lies dormant within his soul. I am weary. So very weary. The weight of empire is a crushing burden, and I long for the tranquility of retirement. But I cannot forsake my duty. Not yet. Rome requires me. I will continue to serve, to the best of my abilities, until the end. He completed the entry, blotted the ink with parchment, and closed the journal. The bronze clasp clicked, sealing away the musings of a man burdened by duty, haunted by doubt, and sustained by Stoicism's enduring wisdom. He extinguished the lamp and lay upon his bed, the storm's clamor lulling him into a fitful slumber. The specters of emperors past danced through his dreams, whispering warnings and cryptic counsel. He tossed and turned, caught between the weight of the world and the solace of peace. Echoes of Rusticus. Rain lashed against the palace windows, each drop a sharp tattoo mirroring the throbbing in Marcus's temples. Seeking refuge from the downpour, both tangible and within, he closed his eyes, only to be met by the wraith of a past lesson, a long-gone mentor. The air was thick with earthy dampness and the sharp tang of cedar. Years ago, a younger Marcus sat perched on a rickety stool in Rusticus's humble study. Sunlight, strained through dingy glass, illuminated a dance of dust motes, highlighting the room's Spartan nature. This was no gilded cage of imperial life, but a space dedicated to quiet thought, to well-loved books and a life of wisdom, not indulgence. Rusticus, a man seemingly hewn from stone, draped in simple homespun, stood before him, his gaze unwavering. His face, a landscape of wrinkles carved by time and reflection, projected profound tranquility. Not classically handsome, he possessed a quiet strength, an authority that commanded respect. The world, Rusticus began, his voice a deep resonance that seemed to hum in the very stones, will incessantly try to define you, Marcus. It will dangle titles, power, pleasures, all transient, ultimately hollow. Accustomed to deference and honeyed words, Marcus found Rusticus's directness invigorating, even challenging. He'd sought out the philosopher, drawn by tales of his unwavering principles and deep understanding of humanity. The court swarmed with flatterers and plotters, all eager to ingratiate themselves with the future emperor. Here, in this modest chamber, he discovered something authentic. Hollow, you say? Marcus countered, a trace of youthful arrogance coloring his voice. Surely, the ability to shape Rome, to secure peace and prosperity for its populace, holds some merit. Rusticus regarded him with a patient smile, the kind one reserves for a student wrestling with a difficult concept. Merit, yes. But enduring significance? No. All is ephemeral, Marcus. Empires bloom and wither, fortunes shift like sand, even the most cherished faces fade to memory. True meaning lies inward, in the realm of virtue and reason, untouched by the tempests of fate. He gestured toward a haphazard stack of scrolls on a nearby table. These are the words of Epictetus, once enslaved, who discovered freedom not through manumission, but by mastering his own mind. He grasped that true liberty resides not in controlling the external world, but in governing your response to it. Rusticus selected a scroll, his fingers gently caressing the aged parchment. Consider this, some things we can control, others we cannot. We can control our opinions, choices, desires, and aversions, in short, our actions. What we cannot control includes our bodies, possessions, reputation, position, and, ultimately, anything not of our own doing. He met Marcus's gaze intently. Can you understand the implications, young Caesar? Can you perceive the freedom it offers? Marcus frowned, grappling with the idea. He had been raised to believe his power boundless, his destiny to command. The notion that so much lay beyond his dominion was unsettling, even daunting. But if external events are beyond our grasp, Marcus argued, what purpose is there in striving? What good is being emperor if I cannot guarantee my people's safety and well-being? Ah, Rusticus said, a glint of amusement in his eyes. Therein lies the crux. You misunderstand. We are not passive observers, simply accepting fate's decrees. We exert ourselves, we act, employing reason and virtue to mold the world as best we can, yet always cognizant that the ultimate result is not ours to command. Our obligation resides in the striving, not the attainment. He paused, allowing his words to resonate. Imagine an archer, Marcus. His expertise lies in drawing the bow, aiming precisely, and releasing the arrow with skill. But whether the arrow finds its mark hinges on factors beyond his command: the wind's breath, the bow's integrity, even the capricious will of the gods. Does this absolve him from striving to be a master archer? Of course not. He aims for excellence, accepting that the outcome is not his sole responsibility. Rusticus approached the window, observing the bustling city spread below. Your duty as emperor is to act justly, to govern with wisdom and empathy, to shield your people from harm. Yet you cannot command the elements, Marcus. You cannot dictate fortune's course. You cannot eradicate all suffering. Acknowledge this. Accept the limitations of your power. And focus upon what you can govern: your thoughts, your actions, your very essence. He turned, his gaze piercing. Cultivate virtue, Marcus. Cultivate wisdom. Cultivate justice, courage, temperance, and prudence. These are the qualities that will sustain you, not the fleeting allure of power and riches. These are the qualities that will define you, long after your empire has crumbled into dust. The memory receded, leaving Marcus shivering in the frigid air of the present. The tempest outside still raged, yet the turmoil within had, momentarily, abated, replaced by a fragile clarity. Rusticus's long-ago counsel resonated with the force of fresh revelation. Cultivate virtue, Marcus. Cultivate wisdom. He had tried. He had labored, with every sinew of his being, to embody the ideals Rusticus had instilled. He had aspired to be a just and compassionate sovereign, a philosopher king prioritizing his people's welfare above his own desires. But had he truly succeeded? The specter of Commodus rose before him, arrogant, rash, brutal. He had failed to nurture virtue in his own son, the individual over whom he wielded the greatest influence. And now, Rome teetered on the brink of ruin, imperiled by the very men entrusted with its protection. The weight of responsibility pressed down, heavier than ever. He had tried to be the archer, aiming true, yet the arrow, it seemed, was destined to stray. Yet even in failure, Rusticus's teachings offered solace. He could not shape the final outcome, but he could govern his response. He could not ensure Rome's survival, but he could pledge to act with integrity, with valor, with a clear conscience. He rose, the ache in his bones a persistent reminder of his mortality. He would confront Commodus again. He would attempt, one last time, to reach him, to instill some sense of accountability, some spark of virtue. And should he fail, he would accept it. He would accept the boundaries of his dominion. He approached the window, his gaze drawn to the storm-swept city. The rain had begun to slacken, and a slender crescent moon peeked through the fractured clouds, casting a muted, spectral glow across the rooftops below. Impermanence, acceptance. The world existed in perpetual motion, in constant transformation, in relentless decline. Nothing endured. Not empires, not friendships, not even existence itself. To cling to the illusion of permanence was to court misery. To embrace the inevitable was to discover peace. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, and for the first time in what felt like an age, he felt a fragile spark of hope. Not the anticipation of glorious victory, but the solace of peaceful resignation. The hope of a man who had striven to do his best, who had labored to live virtuously, and who was now poised to accept whatever fate held in store. He would face Commodus, not with anger or despair, but with the quiet fortitude of a stoic. He would offer his son one final opportunity to embrace virtue, to choose the path of wisdom and empathy. And if Commodus spurned it, he would accept that too. He would accept the limits of his power. He would accept the fleeting nature of all things. He opened his eyes and gazed upon the city, no longer perceiving it as a burden, but as a sacred trust. He was the archer, and he would draw the bow one last time, aiming true, unleashing the arrow with unwavering precision. Whether it struck its target was not his concern. His duty was to strive, to act, to live virtuously, until his final breath. The fleeting nature of power. The stylus etched across the wax tablet, its whisper a counterpoint to the inner rhythm of Marcus's solitary reflection. Beyond the walls of his sanctuary, Rome, the throbbing engine of his dominion, thrummed with a vitality from which he increasingly felt estranged. He pressed the stylus again, its point glinting under the solitary lamplight, and inscribed, Dominion. An artifice, painstakingly constructed, fiercely defended, ultimately relinquished. His hand, etched with the map of countless campaigns, stilled. Emperor of Rome, Marcus Aurelius held sway over more lives than any man breathing. Legions answered his will, laws bore his signature, the fate of nations hung on his pronouncements. Yet, here in the hushed darkness, that same authority felt less a glorious burden and more a suffocating weight. Around him, the busts of past emperors, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, Trajan, stood sentinel. Each had gripped the reins of empire, each had molded its course. Now, they were dust. Echoes. Fables half-remembered. Their potent influence, once absolute, now lingered only in tales, often gilded, warped, or simply forgotten. Hadrian, the architect, the wanderer, whose dominion manifested in ramparts and waterways, the very sinews of Roman existence. But even his grand designs had yielded to the implacable advance of time, or been reshaped by the ambitions of successor generations. All that remained of his sway were fractured stones and fading script. Antoninus Pius, the benevolent sovereign, whose power stemmed from his judiciousness, his sagacity, his capacity for compassionate rule. But even his lauded era of tranquility had known rebellion, famine, and the ever-present specter of conflict. His legacy, a fleeting respite, stood as testament to his tireless efforts, yet remained ever vulnerable to the tempests that perpetually threatened to engulf the empire. And Trajan, the conqueror, who swelled Rome's borders to their zenith. His influence was scrawled in the blood of foes, in the vast tracts of land annexed to the Roman sphere. But those victories had come at a grievous price, a tally measured in lost lives, depleted resources, and the ceaseless need to defend those hard-won territories. The very act of expanding his reach had planted the seeds of future decline. Marcus exhaled, the sound laden with fatigue. Commodus. His son, his heir. The inheritor of this mirage. He saw a shadow blooming within Commodus, a thirst for renown unrefined by prudence, a yearning for adulation untempered by humility. Commodus coveted power as an end, not as a means to the commonweal. He craved its trappings, the roar of the crowd, the fear in his adversaries' eyes. He failed to grasp its obligations, the constant watchfulness, the moral compromises, the sacrifices demanded for responsible governance. He dipped the stylus again, adding to his reflections, the more desperately grasped, the more readily it slips away. Like grains escaping a clenched fist, dominion dwindles with each attempt to bind it too tightly. He recalled a tenet of Epictetus, his beloved Stoic: do not seek to have events happen as you wish, but wish events to happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly. How difficult to apply that lesson to his own life, to reconcile himself to his son's flaws, his empire's vulnerabilities, his own unavoidable demise. He examined his hands, tracing the web of wrinkles that charted his years, the pale scars that whispered of past battles. These hands had ratified decrees that had redirected the course of history, had commanded the destinies of millions. Yet, they were merely hands. Frail, imperfect, fated to crumble to dust. What, then, constituted true influence? He pondered the question, turning it over in his mind like a well-worn coin. Was it the ability to marshal armies? To erect monuments? To enact laws? Perhaps, but these were merely outward displays, transient and ultimately hollow. True power, he surmised, resided within. The ability to govern one's own thoughts and passions, to maintain composure in the face of hardship, to act with fairness and empathy, even when sorely tested. It was the strength to accept the unchangeable, to discover meaning in the present, to live a virtuous life, irrespective of circumstance. He thought of Rusticus, his Stoic guide, who had imparted these very lessons. Rusticus had never sought office, never hungered for accolade or riches. He had led a life of quiet dedication, devoted to wisdom and righteousness. Yet, he had exerted a profound influence on Marcus, shaping his moral compass and guiding his actions. His power resided not in his station, but in his integrity, his unwavering commitment to a life of purpose. He returned to the tablet, the stylus gliding with renewed resolve. True influence lies not in subjugating others, but in mastering oneself. It is found not in the hollow applause of the masses, but in the profound contentment of a life honestly lived. He paused, the words vibrating within him. There remained much to learn, much to overcome. He was still prone to ire, to frustration, to moments of uncertainty. But he was resolute in his commitment to strive for virtue, to live each day as though it were his last. And that, he believed, was the only power of true consequence. He contemplated his forthcoming meeting with Commodus. He would meet him not with anger, but with quiet determination. He would speak to his son with candor and kindness, offering support and direction. He would fulfill his duty, regardless of the outcome. He knew that Commodus might spurn his counsel, might persist on a path of destruction. But that lay beyond his control. All he could do was to behave virtuously, to sow seeds of wisdom and hope, and trust that they would someday blossom. He completed his entry, adding a final reflection: let me seek not dominion, but knowledge. Let me crave not control, but comprehension. Let me not fear the end, but embrace existence, with all its flaws and uncertainties. He laid down the stylus, its faint sound swallowed by the stillness. A sense of tranquility enveloped him, a quiet acceptance of his own limitations, and the limitations of the authority he possessed. The city of Rome continued to pulse beyond his walls, a cacophonous symphony of ambition, avarice, and yearning. But within the confines of his study, he had discovered a different sort of influence, a force that transcended the fleeting realm of emperors and empires. It was the strength of the human spirit, the strength to choose righteousness, even when facing despair. He doused the lamp, immersing the room in shadow. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was not the emperor of Rome, but simply a man, seeking solace in the transient nature of power, and finding it in the enduring strength of his own soul. He rose from his chair, approached the window, and peered out at the slumbering city. The storm had passed, and the first tentative brushstrokes of dawn were beginning to illuminate the eastern horizon. A new day beckoned, bringing with it a fresh opportunity to live a life of purpose and righteousness. News from the border. The midday sun, sieved by the garden's milky windows, dappled the mosaic floor with an intricate dance of light. Seated on a plain wooden stool, Marcus had, with effort, banked the fires of his disquiet. The persistent anxieties, Commodus's latest scandal, the ceaseless importuning of grasping senators, the low grumble of discontent among the legions, had subsided, leaving a fragile peace in their wake. He anchored himself to the rhythm of his own breathing, a steady drumbeat against the cacophony of empire. The words of Epictetus echoed in his mind: it is not events that disturb men, but their judgments about them. How often had he allowed those very judgments, those self-inflicted anxieties, to poison his reason, to plunder his tranquility? A sudden eclipse of light. Marcus opened his eyes. A centurion stood before him, stiff as a ramrod, coated in the grime of the road, breath rasping in his throat. A rent marred his tunic, and a crimson thread of blood trickled down his brow. "Emperor," the centurion rasped, voice roughened by urgency, "news of dire import from the northern frontier." A sigh escaped Marcus, a dry whisper like wine through brittle reeds. His hard-won stillness shattered. The world, it seemed, granted little respite for contemplation. He pushed himself to his feet, his joints voicing their displeasure. The weight of Rome, a palpable pressure, resettled upon his shoulders. "Report," he commanded, his voice even despite the turmoil in his gut. "The Marcomanni, Caesar. They have surged across the Danube in strength. Several watchtowers have fallen. Carnuntum's garrison is besieged." A familiar chill snaked through Marcus. The Marcomanni. Years he had spent battling them, pushing them back only to see them resurge, emboldened and more savage than before. A relentless surge, forever threatening to drown the empire. "Casualties?" he queried. "Grave, Emperor. The barbarians show no quarter." Grim lines etched the centurion's face. "They are despoiling settlements, butchering civilians. The border legions are spread thin as parchment." Marcus closed his eyes, picturing the slaughter, the terror, the desperate flight. A wave of impotence washed over him, the agonizing awareness of his limitations, his inability to shield every soul. "And Commodus?" he inquired, carefully masking his feelings. Hesitation flickered across the centurion's face. "Prince Commodus is indisposed, Emperor. He rests." Marcus's lips tightened into a fine line. Indisposed. Invariably so when duty beckoned. Conveniently absent when faced with hardship or peril. The truth was transparent. Commodus was likely lost in some trivial pursuit, oblivious to the carnage unfolding on the border. Very well, Marcus dismissed, quashing the thought. Brooding on Commodus's failings would solve nothing. He had a war to address. Inform the Praetorian prefect, he instructed. Summon the war council. I require a full accounting of the situation by nightfall. The centurion bowed low. At once, Emperor. He spun on his heel and vanished, his footsteps echoing in the hushed garden. Marcus stood alone, shadows creeping longer around him. The tranquil midday had vanished, supplanted by the stark reality of conflict. He approached a nearby fountain, its water murmuring a soothing melody. He cupped the cool water in his hands, splashing it across his face. The shock roused his mind, sharpened his focus. He needed clarity, decisiveness. Rome teetered on the precipice of war. He could not afford the luxury of personal disappointments, the indulgence of anxieties regarding the future. Duty compelled him, a sacred trust to safeguard his people. He recalled Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, his guiding star. Antoninus had met every adversity with unwavering serenity, a quiet strength that instilled confidence. Marcus had striven to emulate that quality, to cultivate his own reservoir of fortitude. He inhaled deeply, allowing the cool air to fill his lungs. He straightened, squared his shoulders. He was Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome. And he would not yield. He turned and strode towards the palace, his steps firm and resolute. A war awaited his command. Within the palace walls, a frenzy of activity had erupted. Messengers darted through the hallways, their voices muted but frantic. Scribes labored over scrolls, meticulously documenting troop movements and supply lines. The very air vibrated with tension, with the unspoken dread of what lay ahead. Marcus entered his private study, a sanctuary lined with scrolls and topographical maps. He approached a large table, where a detailed map of the northern frontier lay unfurled. His brow furrowed in concentration as he studied it. The Danube snaked across the landscape, a natural bulwark between the empire and the barbarian territories. A bulwark now breached. He traced the river's course with his finger, pinpointing critical strategic locations. Carnuntum. Vindobona. Aquincum. These were the linchpins that stood between the Marcomanni and the heartland of the empire. He needed to bolster these garrisons, to funnel reinforcements to the frontier. But the legions were stretched thin, guarding against incursions across every border. The Parthians in the east, the Moors in Africa, the fractious tribes in Britannia. Rome was an empire encircled, perpetually defending its vast domain. He sighed again, the weight of responsibility an almost physical burden. He knew this conflict would be protracted and arduous. The Marcomanni were a formidable adversary, hardened warriors fiercely protective of their ancestral lands. They would not surrender easily. He needed to galvanize his troops, to inspire them to fight with valor and tenacity. He needed to sway the Senate to allocate the resources necessary to sustain the war effort. And he needed to address the problem of Commodus, to prevent his son's incompetence from sabotaging the campaign. He settled at his desk and began to write. A proclamation for the legions, a dispatch for the Senate. He chose his words with meticulous care, striving to project an unwavering resolve, a palpable confidence. He understood that his words held power, that they could kindle hope amidst despair. As he composed his message, he reflected on his own mortality. Youth had long since faded. The years of campaigns, the unrelenting pressure of leadership, had exacted their toll. Would he live to witness the resolution of this conflict? He banished the thought. He could not afford such distractions. He had a duty to perform, a sacred trust to protect Rome. He would focus on the present, on the task that lay before him. He would expend every ounce of his strength to ensure Rome's triumph. He completed the proclamation and set it aside. He then began to compose a letter to Commodus. He held little hope that his words would alter his son's behavior, but the compulsion to try was overwhelming. He wrote of the sanctity of duty, of the imperative to place the welfare of Rome above personal gratification. He recounted the suffering of the border populace, the sacrifices being made to safeguard the empire. He entreated Commodus to rise to the occasion, to demonstrate a semblance of responsibility and leadership. He was likely casting pearls before swine. But he had to try. He had to exert every effort to guide his son, to prepare him for the day when he would inherit the mantle of power. He sealed the letter and entrusted it to a waiting servant. Deliver this to Prince Commodus with utmost haste, he instructed. The servant bowed and vanished. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a wave of exhaustion cresting over him. He closed his eyes, seeking a fleeting escape from the relentless demands of his station. He knew the days to come would be long and grueling. He would confront agonizing choices, make painful sacrifices. But he would not falter. He would remain steadfast in his principles, true to his oath. He would dedicate his every breath to the protection of Rome, to ensuring its enduring legacy. He opened his eyes and gazed out the window. The sun had begun its descent, casting elongated shadows across the city. Darkness approached, both literally and figuratively. But he would not succumb to fear. He would confront the shadows with courage, with wisdom, with unwavering stoic resolve. He was Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome. And he would not break. He rose from his chair and walked toward the door. The war council awaited. The destiny of Rome teetered on the brink. The scars of war. The battle plans on the war table seemed smudged, not by spilled wine or careless handling, but with the ghostly residue of bloodshed. Marcus's aging vision played tricks, or perhaps it was something more, the past bleeding into the present, echoes of forgotten campaigns stirred by this new threat. His fingers traced the Danube's course, a boundary turned festering wound in the empire's flank. The Marcomanni, fierce and unyielding, hacked a crimson trail south. A familiar pressure constricted his chest, the burden of command bearing down like a collapsing amphitheater. His thoughts, unbidden, veered to another river, another long-ago conflict. Not the Danube's broad, sluggish flow, but the Granua's swift, unforgiving current. Years melted into decades. Yet the memory, seared into his being with regret's corrosive touch, remained pristine. He was younger then, more resilient, quicker to wrath. Yet, even then, the seeds of stoicism, though sown, struggled to sprout in the barren landscape of a general's duty. The Granua campaign. Hailed as decisive. Remembered as a slaughter. The air had choked with the putrid sweetness of burning flesh and raw fear. The wounded's cries tangled with the legion's victorious roars. From a slight rise, he'd watched the carnage unfold, chest hammering, ears ringing. They'd hailed him imperator, spears raised in acclamation. All he could see were the mangled remains. Roman and barbarian, rendered indistinguishable in death's embrace, faces frozen in final, silent screams. The ground, slick with gore, formed a grotesque mosaic of severed limbs and splintered weaponry. He recalled a helmet's broken gleam in the sun, the gathering swarm of flies already feasting on the cooling corpses. The subsequent silence, deeper than any battlefield clamor, haunted him still. He sought solace in Stoic philosophy, in Epictetus's call to accept the uncontrollable. Yet, the battlefield mocked such notions. What mastery did he truly possess when confronted with such raw, primeval savagery? He closed his eyes, the memory a tangible assault. He could taste the acrid smoke, feel the gritty dust underfoot. He could hear. He heard the supplication. As he inspected the aftermath, Praetorian guards flanking him, faces grim masks, the usual horrors assaulted his senses, eviscerated mounts, scattered limbs, the vacant, unseeing eyes of the dying. Then, a desperate thread of sound pierced the moans, rising thin and reedy above the din, Misericordia. Have mercy. The Latin, though recognizable, was mangled by a thick, guttural accent. A barbarian's plea. He followed the sound, his guards parting the fallen like drawn curtains. There he was. A youth, barely older than Commodus, sprawled on his back, a leg grotesquely twisted. His face, smeared with blood and grime, framed eyes wide with stark terror. He grasped at Marcus's leg, fingers digging into the emperor's greaves. Spare me. I beg you. I have a family. A wife. Children. Looking down, Marcus felt his heart turn to stone. He saw not a barbarian, an enemy of Rome, but a son, a husband, a father reduced to begging. Lucius, his Praetorian commander, grizzled and implacable, stepped forward, hand hovering near his gladius. He's a Marcomanni dog, Caesar. Allow me to end him. Marcus hesitated, caught in the grip of conflicting duties. He was emperor, the legion's commander. Mercy was a luxury he dared not afford. Still, he couldn't issue the death sentence. He looked into the pleading eyes, so reflected there his own fragile mortality. He saw Commodus. Spare him, he managed, his voice a bare rasp. Lucius frowned, disapproval etched on his face. Caesar, he's an enemy combatant. He'll fight again. Perhaps, Marcus conceded. But today, he is only a man. Wounded. Helpless. And he seeks clemency. He ordered his men to see to the barbarian's wounds, to move him to the rear and treat him as they would any Roman soldier. He never learned the warrior's fate. Whether he lived or perished. whether he returned to his loved ones. But the memory, a persistent echo of war's brutality, clung to him. The memory was a scar, invisible yet profound, aching whenever he considered the empire's cost, the price of enforced peace. He opened his eyes, the maps snapping back into sharp focus. His advisors' faces, etched with concern, met his gaze. They awaited his command, waiting for him to loose the legions once more. He knew his duty: defend Rome, protect its citizens, break the Marcomanni invasion. But the youth's face, on that long-ago battlefield, refused to fade. He couldn't forget the raw terror in those eyes, the enduring scars of conflict. Straightening, his gaze hardened. He would wage war. But with a heart heavy with the awareness of human suffering. He would strive to temper the savagery with stoic principles. Seek justice, not vengeance. Remember mercy, even amidst the carnage. We march north, he declared, his voice firm and unwavering. We will meet the Marcomanni in battle. But we will not abandon our humanity. We will not descend into barbarity. We fight with courage, with discipline, and with justice as our guide. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces before him. And we will pray the gods grant a swift and decisive victory, so that we may return to Rome and rebuild all that has been broken. He dismissed them, his mind already a whirlwind of troop deployments, supply estimations, and enemy anticipation. He was a soldier once more, a commander poised for war. Yet, he was also a philosopher, wrestling with the moral weight of his decisions. As his advisors departed, Marcus stood alone, the maps reflecting in his weary eyes. He saw more than lines and symbols, he saw the faces of men marching toward their doom, Roman and barbarian alike, bound together in suffering, victims of a cycle destined to repeat itself. He sighed, the world's weight pressing down anew. Emperor, leader of the most formidable empire. Also, a man, burdened by his own limitations, haunted by the wounds of war. Reaching for his writing tablet, his fingers trembled almost imperceptibly. He needed to write, to find solace in contemplation, to reaffirm the principles that guided his life. Dipping his stylus, he began. Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good and evil. But for my part one have long perceived the nature of good and its beauty, and the nature of evil and its meanness, and also the nature of the person who does wrong, and that he is my kinsman. He poured his thoughts onto the parchment, seeking refuge in stoic tenets. Of duty, of virtue, of acceptance. Of the transient nature of existence, the inevitability of death. Of war's enduring scars, and the elusive hope of peace. Later, as campfires flickered, their light painting the night with restless shadows, and the legion's preparations filled the air with murmuring anticipation, Marcus walked alone, beneath the vast, diamond-dusted canvas of the night sky. He sought guidance in the constellations, yearned for meaning. He felt infinitesimal, a mortal cog in the grand cosmic machinery. He thought of Commodus, safe within Rome's walls, unaware of the horrors looming. Would his son ever comprehend the crushing weight of leadership? He doubted it. He closed his eyes, drawing deep the cool night air. He controlled neither the past nor the future. Only the present mattered, the pursuit of virtue, the performance of duty. Opening his eyes, his gaze was clear, resolute. He was ready. Ready to face whatever trials awaited. Ready to fight for Rome. Ready to die, if needed. Turning, he walked back toward his tent, shoulders squared, steps purposeful. He was the emperor. And he would lead his legions into battle with courage, wisdom, and a soul burdened by the knowledge that some scars never truly fade. Justice and mercy. The wax tablet felt cool beneath his fingers, the stylus a precise, insistent counterpoint to the Praetorian Guard's restless movements just beyond the tent flap. Marcus hesitated, the word justice only partially formed. A lifelong pursuit, its essence seemed to recede further with each passing year. He refreshed the stylus from the inkwell, the viscous fluid clinging to the tip like a solemn promise. Justice. But of what stripe? Was it merely the unyielding application of law, a balance sheet of retribution? Or did it demand a subtler understanding, an infusion of compassion? The spectral faces of barbarian children he'd encountered during the Granua campaign flickered in his mind's eye, hollow-cheeked and terror-stricken. Did their mere existence warrant Rome's implacable hostility? He exhaled, the regal purple of his toga suddenly a tangible burden. How easily one could declaim on justice within the Senate's marble embrace, amidst senators bloated with privilege and distanced from the brutal realities of the frontier. Here, on the cusp of battle, steeped in the reek of wood smoke and exertion, such philosophical ideals seemed to evaporate like morning frost. He resumed writing, adding, "Justice divorced from mercy breeds tyranny, mercy devoid of justice, impotence." A simple dictum, yet its practical application felt like an ever-escalating labor. Commodus. His son. The heir. A cold fist clenched in Marcus's gut. Was it just to saddle him with such a weighty inheritance, knowing his inherent deficiencies? Was it merciful to Rome to permit his ascension? Questions churned within him, a maelstrom threatening to swamp his carefully maintained composure. Setting down the stylus, the tense silence amplified his inner turmoil. He moved to the tent's opening, observing the legionaries clustered around flickering bonfires. Their faces, sculpted by the dancing flames, presented a mosaic of experience, seasoned veterans bearing the haunted gaze of those who'd seen too much, and green recruits trembling with a blend of anticipation and dread. All Romans, bound by duty, the shared allure of glory, and the looming specter of death. He noticed a young soldier, scarcely older than Commodus, nervously honing his gladius. The boy's hands shook, and he drew a tiny crimson bead of blood. A wave of empathy washed over Marcus. This boy, like so many others, stood on the precipice of war's abyss, all for the sake of Rome, for the sake of justice. But was this justice? He knew the familiar justifications: Rome must safeguard her dominion. The barbarians threatened the Pax Romana. Imperial stability hinged on unwavering strength. But veiled beneath such pronouncements lay the stark reality of mangled bodies, shattered dreams, and an unending cycle of brutality. He turned from the aperture, his gaze settling on the bust of Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father and predecessor. Antoninus, renowned for his gentleness, his unwavering dedication to peace. Yet even he had been compelled to wage war, to make agonizing choices that etched themselves upon his soul. "How did you manage it, father?" Marcus murmured to the unanswering tent. "How did you reconcile the demands of leadership with the imperatives of conscience?" Only the mocking stillness of the canvas replied. He knew Antoninus, like all mortals, had been flawed. He had erred, suffered loss, and wrestled with the same gnawing uncertainties that now gripped Marcus. But he had also strived for virtue, to govern with wisdom and empathy. And that, Marcus understood, was all that could be asked. He returned to the tablet, adding, "The pursuit of justice is a perpetual journey, a ceaseless striving for equilibrium within an inherently unbalanced world." He pondered a different approach to governance, one prioritizing education and diplomacy over sheer military might. Perhaps, by fostering a sense of shared humanity among the barbarians, by demonstrating the advantages of Roman civilization, he could forestall future conflicts. A naive aspiration, perhaps, yet worthy of pursuit. He knew many in the Senate would dismiss such notions with scorn. They perceived the barbarians as mere savages, creatures ripe for subjugation. But Marcus held the conviction that even the most hardened warrior possessed a flicker of humanity, a capacity for reason and fellow-feeling. It was the emperor's responsibility to fan that spark, to guide them toward a better path. The barbarian youth he'd spared on the Granua River surfaced in his thoughts, the boy whose life he had inexplicably elected to preserve. Had that act of clemency been a misjudgment? Had it emboldened the barbarians, fueling further hostilities? Or had it sown a seed of goodwill, a faint glimmer of hope amidst the darkness? He would likely never know. He dipped the stylus anew, his hand now guided by a renewed sense of purpose. "Mercy is not weakness," he inscribed. "It is strength leavened with wisdom. It is the capacity to perceive the humanity within our adversaries, to acknowledge their suffering, and to offer them the prospect of redemption." He understood that he couldn't reshape the world in a single stroke. He couldn't obliterate centuries of animosity that had cleaved Romans from barbarians. But he could begin. He could lead by example, embodying the tenets of Stoicism in his deeds and pronouncements. He could endeavor to be a just and compassionate sovereign, even when besieged by overwhelming opposition. He closed the wax tablet, the inscribed words a testament to his enduring internal battle. He knew the approaching battle would test his mettle, pushing him to the very edge of his physical and moral limits. But he was prepared. He would meet the challenge with valor and discernment, guided by principles of justice and mercy. He would fight for Rome, but he would also fight for a more promising future, a future where peace and understanding might ultimately triumph. The Senate's shadows. Rose and amber hues splashed across the tense fabric with the rise of dawn, a painful contrast to the umbral anxieties gripping Marcus. He had sought refuge in the pre-dawn stillness, a fleeting escape before the demands of command descended once more. Yet even here, that burdensome weight, a mantle woven from responsibility and uncertainty, persisted. Inevitably, his thoughts returned, as they always did, to Rome. Not the gleaming Rome of monuments and triumphs, but a city of clandestine dealings and veiled agendas, the Senate. Ostensibly, it was a council meant to embody the people's will, but in reality, it resembled more a serpent's den of ambition, where alliances fractured like sun-baked earth and betrayal served as common currency. Intellectually, he grasped the vital role of a robust Senate for a thriving Rome, envisioning it as a counterweight to imperial authority, a crucible for debate, a wellspring of sage counsel. But the reality stung. The venerable families, the Cornelii, the Fabii, the Julii, names echoing across the ages, their clout ingrained within the very essence of the empire. Titans, yes, yet also vulnerable, their influence precariously balanced on their capacity to either appease or, more disturbingly, to manipulate the emperor's whims. He had witnessed it all firsthand. The carefully orchestrated accolades, the strategically disseminated rumors, the veiled threats garbed in patriotic zeal. He had observed the insidious corrosion of character, the gradual contamination of public service. Men who had pledged their fealty to Rome readily shattered those vows for a taste of greater dominion, vaster holdings, a loftier title. And he, Marcus, had propelled some of them forward, recognizing their instrumental value in securing support, accessing networks, and leveraging experience. Leadership, he reminded himself, was often purchased with compromise. Avitus sprung to mind, a man born of noble stock, brimming with even grander aspirations. His service to Rome was beyond reproach, having commanded legions in Gaul and governed provinces with an iron fist. Marcus had confided in him, prized his opinions. And yet, he knew, with bone-chilling certainty, that Avitus nurtured his own designs. He detected it in the slight overstay of Avitus's gaze on the imperial insignia, in his subtle prodding of conversations toward the subject of succession. Not outright sedition, at least not yet, but a simmering discontent, a muted hunger that might, given the right confluence of circumstances, ignite into something truly perilous. And there existed others, less conspicuous, more insidious. Men who traded whispers in darkened corners, cultivated friendships with influential advisors, and scattered doubt like wind-borne seeds. Parasites, all of them, feeding on the body politic, weakening it from within. A sigh escaped his lips, swallowed by the burgeoning clamor of the camp. He had striven, over the years, to purify the Senate, to ignite within its members a sense of civic responsibility, to remind them that their allegiance must lie with Rome, not with their own self-interest. He had elevated honorable men to positions of power, championed legislation designed to foster transparency and accountability. But the decay proved too pervasive. The allure of power, too irresistible. He suspected the root of the problem lay not merely with the individuals themselves, but with the systemic flaws. The immense wealth concentrated in the hands of the privileged few, the absence of authentic representation for the common populace, the inherent inequalities ingrained within Roman society, these were the tendrils of the rot. And these were the roots he had found himself either unable or unwilling to fully eradicate. To do so would have necessitated challenging the very bedrock of the empire, courting cataclysmic upheaval. He had opted for stability, even at the cost of accepting the compromises that accompanied it. Now, with the specter of mortality looming ever larger, he questioned the wisdom of his choice. Had his caution betrayed him? His pragmatism blinded him? Had he bartered long-term integrity for the fleeting promise of peace? These questions haunted him, echoing in the solitude of his tent. Commodus. His son. His heir. The inheritor of this tangled web of authority and deceit. He knew Commodus lacked the necessary fortitude, the sagacity, the moral compass to navigate the treacherous currents of Roman politics. He was too easily seduced by flattery, too susceptible to rash decisions, too vulnerable to the corrupting influence of power. The prospect of Commodus leading the Senate filled Marcus with a profound sense of foreboding. He could already envision the obsequiousness, the venality, the unchecked ambition spiraling out of control. He foresaw the empire crumbling beneath the crushing weight of its own decadence, not from external invasion, but from internal corruption. He had labored to guide Commodus, to instill in him the tenets of Stoicism, to cultivate within him a sense of duty. But his efforts had largely been fruitless. Commodus seemed to resent his father's teachings, viewing them as impediments to his freedom, obstacles to his desires. He preferred the company of gladiators and chariot racers to philosophers and statesmen. He reveled in the adulation of the masses, while shunning the arduous labor of governance. And yet, Marcus loved him. He was his son. His only son. And the thought of denouncing him, of publicly questioning his capacity to rule, felt almost unbearable. He knew it would ignite a scandal, a succession crisis that could plunge the empire into civil war. He also knew it might represent the only hope of salvaging Rome from its own self-destruction. The dilemma cleaved him in two, a relentless, agonizing battle between obligation and affection, between rationality and sentiment. He yearned for a straightforward solution, a clear path forward. But none presented itself. Only gradations of gray, only burdensome choices, only the crushing weight of accountability. He stood, his joints protesting, his body heavy with fatigue. The sun now dominated the horizon, bathing the camp in its fiery glow. The sounds of soldiers preparing for the day's battle permeated the air, a stark reminder of the imminent threat that confronted them. He needed to focus, to fortify himself for the challenges ahead. He could ill afford to be consumed by his anxieties, his misgivings. He had a war to wage, a populace to safeguard. But as he stepped out of his tent, he carried with him the heavy realization that the true battle, the one that would ultimately decide Rome's destiny, was not unfolding on the plains of Pannonia, but within the shadows of the Senate. And that was a battle he feared he was already doomed to lose. Distrust settled like a stone in his gut, a frigid nucleus of apprehension. He was surrounded by men who would feign loyalty while plotting in secret. How could one individual, even an emperor, combat such a pervasive and unseen adversary? The loyalty he yearned for, the integrity he prized, seemed like faint constellations, beyond reach in the encroaching darkness. He felt the isolation of supreme power intensely, burdened by secrets that could shatter the empire, by suspicions of treachery he could not yet substantiate. Every advisor, every senator, was now scrutinized through the lens of suspicion, their words dissected for hidden agendas, their motivations questioned relentlessly. A lonely and grueling existence, this perpetual state of vigilance, this constant defense against the invisible forces seeking to undermine his authority. The very atmosphere of Rome seemed saturated with the scent of conspiracy, and he, the emperor, was its most coveted prize. The serpent Cassius. Cassius. The name insinuated itself into Marcus's awareness, a serpent coiling in his gut. Cassius Severus. It had been breathed in the halls of power, a nervous undertone amid the usual bureaucratic clamor. Initially, he dismissed it as the invention of eager-to-please informants, men angling for advancement by fabricating conspiracies. Yet, the murmurs persisted, each one a subtle abrasion against his composure. He remained in his sanctuary, the familiar redolence of polished wood and aged documents a balm to his spirit. The setting sun stretched long fingers across the room, highlighting swirling dust devils like miniature phantoms. A scroll lay open in his grasp, purportedly detailing grain deliveries from the Nile, but his thoughts refused to coalesce. Cassius. The name reverberated within him, a jarring discord against the stoic equilibrium he sought. He lowered the scroll, the papyrus rustling softly. Cassius Severus was a viper, without question. Possessed of boundless ambition, a hunger for dominance that consumed him from within. Marcus had long recognized it, glimpsed the glint of envy in Cassius's gaze during their encounters, the poorly veiled resentment simmering beneath a mask of courteousness. But mere envy was insufficient cause for alarm. The Senate seethed with it, a stagnant swamp where minor affronts and grandiose aspirations mingled. Cassius's craftiness was the true threat. A master manipulator, he spun intricate webs of influence. He knew how to incite discord, exploit frailties, and fan desires. He was a wraith, always hovering at the periphery, his designs hidden behind a carefully constructed facade of fealty. Rising, Marcus crossed to the window. Rome unfurled before him, a sprawling panorama of sacred temples and humble dwellings, bustling forums, and elegant fountains. The city throbbed with vitality, with aspiration, with the relentless striving that defined the Roman ethos. Within this vast organism, Cassius represented a rogue cell, slowly metastasizing, capable of corrupting the whole. An incident, deliberately suppressed, resurfaced in his memory. Years prior, during the protracted Parthian campaign, when discontent began to fester in Rome, Cassius had been instrumental. Covertly, of course. He was too cunning for direct action. But a reliable source informed Marcus that Cassius had been subtly encouraging dissent, sowing seeds of doubt about the war's justification, questioning Marcus's authority. He had even alluded to the possibility of a more suitable ruler. Marcus had confronted him, obliquely, framing his accusations within a hypothetical discourse on the perils of sedition. Cassius had vehemently denied everything, his expression a portrait of fabricated innocence. He had pledged his unwavering allegiance to Marcus, his devotion to Rome. Lacking conclusive proof, Marcus had elected to disregard it, partly from a reluctance to believe such treachery, and partly because greater conflicts demanded his attention. The Parthians threatened the empire's borders, and internal strife seemed a luxury he could not indulge. But the recollection lingered, a bitter aftertaste. He had extended Cassius the benefit of the doubt, perhaps unwisely. He had hoped the men would acknowledge the imprudence of his ways, choose righteousness over ambition's allure. But perhaps he had erred in his judgment. Perhaps Cassius was beyond redemption. Now, years later, the murmurs had returned, louder and more insistent. They spoke of clandestine gatherings, of veiled menaces, of alliances forged under the cloak of darkness. They spoke of Cassius's burgeoning sway within the Senate, his aptitude for swaying votes and shaping policy. Most alarming of all, they detailed his escalating criticism of Commodus. Therein lay the core of the matter, the barb that pierced Marcus's carefully constructed Stoic defenses. Cassius did not assail Marcus openly. He was too sagacious for such a blunder. Instead, he aimed at Commodus, subtly eroding his legitimacy, questioning his capabilities, portraying him as feeble and unworthy of the emperorship. It was an ingenious tactic. By undermining Commodus, Cassius not only positioned himself as a viable alternative but also struck at Marcus himself, casting doubt on his judgment, besmirching his legacy. Marcus sighed, the sound laden with fatigue. He had hoped to shelter Commodus from the Senate's predators, to steer him toward virtue and wisdom. Yet, Commodus seemed determined to resist his guidance, to indulge in the very excesses Marcus abhorred. Now, Cassius was exploiting that vulnerability, feeding on Commodus's imperfections, employing him as a mere piece in his intricate game. He turned from the window, his gaze settling upon a bust of Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father and predecessor. Antoninus had been a paragon of virtue and sagacity, a sovereign who had governed with justice and empathy. Marcus had perpetually striven to emulate him, to uphold the lofty standards he had established. Lately, however, he felt as though he was failing. He had failed to cleanse the Senate, he had failed to guide Commodus, and now, he confronted a potential peril from within, a serpent nestled in Rome's very heart. What was Cassius's ultimate objective? Did he simply crave power for its own sake, or was there a deeper design? Did he genuinely believe he could govern Rome more effectively than Marcus, or was he consumed by a desire for retribution, an urge to settle old scores? The questions churned in Marcus's mind, each one more disturbing than the last. He realized he could no longer ignore the murmurs. He had to confront the threat Cassius posed, not only to his rule but to the very fabric of Rome. But how to proceed? He could order Cassius's apprehension, have him imprisoned or even put to death. But that would be an extreme measure, likely to incite a revolt among his Senate allies. It would also appear tyrannical, an offense against the principles of equity and due process that Marcus cherished. Alternatively, he could attempt to reason with Cassius, to appeal to his sense of duty and patriotism. He could remind him of the vital importance of stability and cohesion, of the necessity to prioritize Rome's interests above personal ambition. Yet, Marcus doubted Cassius would be influenced by such appeals. He was a pragmatist, a Machiavellian individual who believed the outcome justified the methodology. Perhaps the optimal course was to gather further intelligence, to ascertain the full scope of Cassius's intrigues. He required irrefutable evidence, proof that would withstand scrutiny. He needed to identify Cassius's confederates, their motivations, and their ultimate aspirations. He returned to his desk and took up a stylus. He would summon Flavius, the director of his intelligence network. Flavius was a man of unwavering fidelity and discretion, an expert in espionage and intrigue. He would uncover the truth about Cassius, expose his machinations, and bring him to justice. Even as he prepared to summon Flavius, Marcus felt a twinge of uncertainty. Was he making the right choice? Was he motivated by reason and virtue, or by apprehension and suspicion? Was he acting in Rome's best interests, or merely protecting his own authority? The questions tormented him, a constant reminder of leadership's burden. He was the emperor, the most powerful man on earth. Yet, he was merely a man, susceptible to the same imperfections and weaknesses as any other. He was prone to error, capable of being influenced by emotion. He paused, the stylus hovering over the wax tablet. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, seeking refuge in the teachings of Epictetus. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He must concentrate on what he could influence, his own thoughts, his own deeds. He could not dictate Cassius's ambition, nor Commodus's frailty. But he could manage his own response. He could resolve to act with reason and fairness, with sagacity and empathy. He could resolve to be a virtuous man, even in the face of adversity. He opened his eyes and began to write. He would summon Flavius, but he would also summon Cassius. He would confront him directly, not with animosity or indictment, but with a serene and controlled manner. He would afford Cassius the opportunity to vindicate himself, to defend his actions. He would listen intently and carefully, pursuing the truth, not merely validation of his suspicions. He knew it was a perilous strategy. It could backfire, affording Cassius the chance to advance his agenda further. However, Marcus believed it was the moral imperative. He had to extend Cassius the benefit of the doubt, as he had done before. He had to place faith in the power of reason and virtue, even when confronting malevolence. He completed the message and affixed it with his signet. He would dispatch it without delay. The game had commenced. Integrity's light. The stylus felt substantial in Marcus's grip, the cool wax tablet a familiar comfort against his palm. A new dawn splashed the Palatine with apricot and rose, a spectacle dulled by the burdens of office. His mind, usually a source of clear philosophical thought, felt clouded, weighed down by imperial anxieties. He pressed the stylus to the wax. Integrity, he inscribed, the word a stark declaration on the yielding surface. He paused, contemplating the gravity of that single virtue. It was the cornerstone of all virtues, justice, temperance, courage, wisdom, without which they became mere pretenses. But how to safeguard it, he wondered, in a world steeped in compromise. How to navigate the treacherous currents of Roman politics without succumbing to the lure of expediency. Cassius Severus, with his silken words and subtle machinations, served as a constant, unwelcome reminder of the encroaching corruption. He exhaled, the sound swallowed by the cavernous silence of his private rooms. Duty pressed upon him, a palpable weight. He was not just a man, but Caesar, a symbol. His actions resonated throughout the empire, shaping the destinies of millions. Every decision, every conciliation, carried consequence. He thought of Commodus. His son's shortcomings were a persistent ache, a nagging fear for the future. Commodus possessed the title, the bloodline, but lacked the inner strength, the moral compass to steer Rome. Marcus had tried, truly tried, to instill in him stoic principles, the qualities of leadership. But Commodus remained impulsive, easily swayed by flattery, and given to excess. Perhaps, Marcus reflected, he had failed as a sire. Or perhaps, some spirits were simply impervious to virtue's call. The thought left a bitter taste. He had devoted his life to self-betterment, to harmony with the natural order. Accepting his own son might be beyond redemption was a profound disappointment. He returned to the tablet, his thoughts eddying like currents in a river. Integrity is not the absence of corruption, he penned, but the refusal to yield. Not a passive condition, but an active struggle, a constant guard against the insidious forces seeking to erode it. He recalled a dialogue with his tutor, Fronto, long ago. The rhetorician had argued that sometimes, the ends justified the means, that a leader must occasionally bend principles for the greater good. Marcus had vehemently disagreed. If we forfeit our integrity, he had countered, what good do we achieve? What kind of world do we build? A realm where deceit and manipulation prevail. Where trust is a liability. Fronto had merely smiled, a knowing, worldly smile. You are young, Marcus. You will learn the world is not so straightforward. But Marcus had resisted that cynicism. He still did. The world was complex, messy, often unjust. Yet, that did not excuse moral surrender. It demanded even greater fidelity to virtue. He dipped his stylus once more, his hand moving with renewed resolve. We are all vulnerable to fortune's whims, he inscribed. To sickness, to bereavement, to frustration. But our integrity remains our own. The one possession immune to theft, unless willingly surrendered. He considered his own mortality. He felt the weight of years in his bones, the weariness in his soul. His time was finite. The empire would transition, whether to Commodus or another. He could not dictate the future. He could only govern himself. And that, he now understood, sufficed. He could live with integrity. He could strive to be a just, empathetic ruler. He could set an example, however flawed, for others to emulate. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. The morning air, crisp and pure, carried the scent of pines from the gardens below. A sense of tranquility descended, a quiet acceptance. He could not ensure Rome's destiny. But he could guarantee his own conduct. He would confront Cassius Severus. He would expose the truth, whatever its form. And he would do so with integrity, with reason, and with justice. He would eschew deceit, manipulation. He would not trade his principles for short-term gain. He opened his eyes, his gaze unwavering. The sun had climbed higher, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. He was ready. He was prepared to face whatever trials awaited. He was prepared to execute his duty, not simply as emperor, but as a human being. He rose from his chair, the woods grown a small sound within the vast palace. He approached the window, surveying the city. Rome sprawled before him, a rich tapestry of life and ambition, beauty and decay. It was his charge to steer it, to safeguard it, to guide it toward a brighter horizon. He would do so with integrity. He would do so with the light of virtue illuminating his spirit. He summoned his guards. The time had come. Time to confront Cassius Severus. Time to defend the principles that had shaped his existence. As he walked towards the audience chamber, he passed a looking-glass. He paused, studying his reflection. He saw the lines etched upon his countenance, the fatigue in his gaze. But he also discerned something else, a flicker of determination, a spark of hope. He was an aging man, approaching life's twilight. Yet, his purpose was not complete. He still had a responsibility to fulfill. He still had a legacy to forge. And that legacy would be rooted in integrity. The wisdom of Pius. The purple of his imperial robes felt like leaden armor tonight. Marcus adjusted them, the coarse wool chafing against his skin, a physical echo of the mental torment. Another night sacrificed to the empire's endless demands, serpentine intrigues slithering from the Senate, the incessant reports of border skirmishes, and the dull ache of disappointment that was his son, Commodus. He yearned for the battlefield's stark simplicity, the brutal honesty of war, a far cry from the deceit curdling within Rome's heart. From the palace balcony, he gazed upon the Palatine Hill, the sprawling city, a mosaic of winking lights and shadowed forms. The Tiber, a sluggish black serpent, wound its way through the urban sprawl. He craved direction, a steadying hand in the tempest that raged within. Not the grand pronouncements of philosophers, nor the oily platitudes of the court. He needed Pius. Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father. The very thought of him soothed his weary soul. He closed his eyes, conjuring his image. Not the imposing marble figure of statues, but the man himself. The gentle curve of his nose, the unwavering calm reflected in his hazel eyes, the slight tremor that danced in his hands as he poured wine. Pius had been an island of quiet strength, an almost ethereal serenity amidst the empire's clamor. He wasn't a military prodigy like Trajan, nor a captivating speaker like Hadrian. He was simply upright. In a world festering with ambition and betrayal, Pius had cultivated a sanctuary of virtue, where justice and empathy flourished. A specific event surfaced in his memory. A delegation, hailing from a humble, impoverished province, had journeyed to Rome, pleading for respite from crippling taxes imposed by a venal governor. The Senate, swayed by the governor's influential cronies, was poised to dismiss their petition outright. Marcus, then just a youth, had risen to their defense, his voice ringing with indignation. He presented damning evidence of the governor's corruption, fueled by youthful conviction. Pius listened with unwavering patience, his expression an unreadable mask. When Marcus finished, breathless and flushed, Pius had simply observed, "Justice isn't always a thunderclap, Marcus. Sometimes, it is the gentle rain that nourishes the roots." And then, quietly, methodically, he had dismantled the governor's network of influence, not with theatrical decrees or public shaming, but with precisely chosen words and subtle political maneuvers. He replaced the corrupt official with a just and sympathetic administrator, ensuring the province received essential relief. all accomplished without inciting needless conflict or upsetting the delicate power dynamics within the Senate. Marcus, in his younger years, had been frustrated, impatient with Pius's deliberate pace. He had craved immediate, decisive victories, a public display of retribution. But Pius had demonstrated that true authority lay not in raw power, but in the art of navigating the complexities of human nature, charting the most efficient course towards justice. He opened his eyes, the image of Pius as sharp as if he stood before him. He realized he'd become so fixated on the empire's grand machinations, the looming threats at the borders, that he'd overlooked the smaller, more human acts of kindness and compassion that define true leadership. The burden of duty had eclipsed the simple virtues that gave life meaning. Pius had never chased accolades or sought recognition. His focus remained steadfastly on what was right, on alleviating suffering, and fostering a fairer world. He understood that genuine power resided not in the symbols of empire, but in the resilience of one's character. Another lesson returned to him. He'd been wrestling with a particularly thorny decision, torn between two opposing paths. Both had compelling arguments, both harbored potential pitfalls. Seeking Pius's counsel, he'd laid out the case for each option. Pius listened intently, then stated, "Marcus, the solution isn't in selecting the lesser evil, but in discerning the good that can be realized within either situation." He then guided Marcus to recognize the potential advantages of each course and devise a plan to mitigate the risks. He revealed that even in the most challenging circumstances, a path to virtue could always be found. Pius possessed a profound sense of acceptance. He grasped the ephemeral nature of all things, the futility of clinging to what was beyond control. He embraced his own mortality with grace and peace. Marcus recalled the day Pius fell ill. He was summoned to his bedside, his heart heavy with foreboding. Pius was pale and frail, but his gaze was clear, his voice calm. "Marcus," he had whispered, "do not mourn me. Death is a natural facet of life. It is not to be dreaded, but embraced. Live each day as if it were your last, but plan as if you were to live eternally." He then offered a faint smile, a fleeting expression that belied the pain he endured. "And remember, Marcus," he added, "the finest way to honor my memory is to live a life steeped in virtue." Marcus had fought to suppress his tears. He knew Pius was succumbing, yet he resisted acknowledging it. He clung to the hope of a miraculous recovery. But Pius confronted his fate with serenity. He faced death with the same unwavering spirit that defined his response to every tribulation. Now, standing on the balcony, Marcus felt a wave of renewed purpose. He understood he'd allowed himself to be swallowed by the negativity and corruption swirling around him. He'd neglected Pius's teachings, the vital importance of kindness, empathy, and acceptance. He would not surrender to the encroaching darkness. He would strive to embody the virtues of his adoptive father, to lead with justice and compassion, to unearth the good inherent in every circumstance. He would begin by confronting Cassius Severus. Not with rage or condemnation, but with an unshakable resolve to expose his deceit and bring him to justice. He would not be deterred by Severus's threats or cowed by his influence. He would simply present the facts and trust the Senate to render its judgment. And he would dedicate more of his attention to Commodus. He refused to abandon his son, regardless of how grievous his disappointment. He would endeavor to instill in him the principles of virtue and justice, to shepherd him toward righteousness. He knew the undertaking would be arduous, perhaps even fruitless, but he owed it to Rome to attempt it. He inhaled deeply, the crisp night air invigorating his senses. A sense of tranquility descended upon him, a quiet strength that had eluded him for far too long. He remained burdened by the weight of his office, but no longer crushed by it. He had found solace in the memory of Pius, and he was now determined to embody his example. He turned and re-entered the palace, his steps resolute and filled with determination. A challenging path lay ahead, but he now felt ready to traverse it. He carried the wisdom of Pius to guide him, and the force of his own convictions to embolden him. He would not waver. He would not yield. He would remain steadfast to his principles, even when facing adversity. For that was the only true way to honor the memory of Antoninus Pius, and the only way to safeguard the future of Rome. He understood the immense task ahead. The empire stretched far, its complexities deeply ingrained. Yet, even the smallest act of kindness, the simplest gesture of justice, could resonate profoundly. He would focus on these small acts, these simple gestures. He would endeavor to make a difference, one day, one decision at a time. He would start by visiting the hospital tomorrow, spending time with the ill and wounded. He would listen to their stories, offer comfort, and ensure they received the best possible care. It was a modest act, but a starting point. And he would pen a missive to the governor of a faraway province, a region plagued by drought and famine. He would offer assistance, resources, and guidance. He would remind him of his responsibility to the people, of the significance of compassion and equity. He realized that these deeds alone would not resolve all of Rome's woes. But they marked a stride in the right direction. They would stand as a testament to the virtues of Pius, and a reminder that even amidst the darkest times, hope always lingered. Embracing mortality. The sinking sun bled across the Palatine Hill, staining the marble with flamboyant shades of apricot and plum. Alone on his balcony, Marcus Aurelius felt Rome's burden, the world's weight, crush him, a pressure akin to the very foundations underfoot. Below, the city exhaled, smoky tendrils from countless fires, the faintest susurrus of voices, the clangorous pulse of a forge. Life, vigorous and unyielding, pressed on, uncaring of his fatigue. Death had been his companion in thought. Not the abstract contemplation of his meditations, but a stark, intimate understanding. The earlier throat tickle now resonated within, a cavernous echo within his ribcage. A coppery taste stained his palate at times, a grim reminder of his fading existence. He drew a weary hand down his lined face, a topography carved by worry and command. The vibrant promise of youth was a distant memory, eclipsed by the stark reality of power's demands. He felt like a soldier worn ragged by endless campaigns, a shepherd struggling with a wayward flock. And the final battle, against the inexorable tide of time, had already begun. What was the purpose? The relentless skirmishes on barbarian frontiers, the Senate's viperous intrigues, the constant struggle for order and justice in a world choked by chaos and venality. Was it all a fleeting illusion, a futile performance on the grand stage of being? Stoicism had been his refuge, the pursuit of virtue and reason his guide. He had striven to live in harmony with nature, accepting the unchangeable, finding solace in the present. Yet even the deepest philosophy struggled to quell the primal dread of oblivion. He remembered Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, a figure of profound respect. Pius had met his end calmly, with a quiet nobility that had etched itself into young Marcus's memory. No dramatic declarations, no desperate grasp at fleeting existence. Simply acceptance, and a gentle appreciation for the gift of time given. Could he mirror that grace? Could he confront mortality with comparable fortitude? Uncertainty lingered. So much remained undone, so many battles yet to wage. And then there was Commodus. His son. A persistent disappointment, a dark portent hanging over Rome's future. He closed his eyes, centering on his breath, striving to calm the storm within. He envisioned himself as a single wave in the expansive ocean of existence, rising and falling, returning to the source. He was part of something larger, a thread woven into the intricate fabric of life. His individual span was ephemeral, but the tapestry would endure. A breeze stirred, carrying the sweet scent of jasmine from the gardens below. Opening his eyes, he gazed at the city once more. The light was fast receding, shadows stretching, yet the city teemed with life. And he, Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, remained part of it. He rose and returned to his chambers. A lone oil lamp flickered, casting a golden pool on the scattered scrolls and implements. He picked up a stylus, dipping it in ink. He would write. He would continue to write, to chronicle his thoughts and reflections, to wrestle with the paradoxes of life and death. He would leave a legacy of his struggles, a compass for those who followed. Perhaps he could continue to serve Rome, even in absence. He began to inscribe, the stylus whispering against the papyrus. He wrote of obligation, of rectitude, of the vital importance of rational living. He wrote of life's transience, and the need to accept the inevitable. He wrote of Antoninus Pius, and the lessons learned from his example. He wrote of Commodus, his son, his burden, his aspiration. He knew Commodus was not the emperor he yearned for, yet he refused to surrender hope. He would continue to guide, to teach, to pray for his son's redemption. He wrote until the oil dwindled, until his hand ached and his vision blurred. Then, he set down the stylus and stretched, feeling the protest of stiff joints. He walked to the window, gazing out at the city. The moon ascended, bathing the rooftops and temples in silver. The city was hushed, the sounds of day replaced by nocturnal murmurs. The distant call of an owl reached his ears, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. A strange calm enveloped him. Fear of death lingered, but its grip had loosened. He had faced it, stared it down, and found it not all-powerful. He was mortal, undeniably. His time finite. But he was alive, in this moment. And he would dedicate his remaining time to virtue and service, for Rome and its people. He would embrace his mortality, not as a terminus, but as a challenge. An invitation to live fully, to seize each moment, to leave the world a little brighter than he found it. Turning from the window, he moved towards his bed. He extinguished the lamp, plunging the chamber into darkness. He lay down, closed his eyes, and inhaled deeply. He was ready. Ready for whatever fate held. Ready to greet his end with courage and poise. Ready to accept the inevitable. Sleep descended, his mind at peace. He dreamt of Antoninus Pius, of sunlit meadows and joyful laughter. He dreamt of a Rome at peace, a beacon of justice and prosperity. He dreamt of a future where his influence would persist, not through monuments or proclamations, but in the memories of those who recalled him as a man who strove for duty, lived with integrity, and met death with composure. He jolted awake, ensnared by a nightmare, Rome ablaze, Commodus a power-crazed tyrant on the throne. He sat up, heart hammering, brow slick with perspiration. The dream's intensity chilled him, a stark warning of potential ruin. He must ensure Commodus was ready, steer him towards wisdom and virtue. He left the bed and walked to the window. Dawn painted the sky with rose and gold. The city was awakening. The sounds of the streets drifted up, vendors' calls, the clatter of carts on stone. He drew a breath, filling his lungs with the crisp morning air. A renewed purpose surged within, a resolve to confront the challenges looming. He would not yield to despair, nor abandon hope. He would fight for Rome, its people, its future. He dressed and went to his private chapel. He knelt before the altar and prayed, not for personal salvation, but for Rome's. He sought wisdom, strength, the power to guide Commodus towards righteousness. He prayed for peace, justice, the well-being of his subjects. He prayed to be worthy, to leave a heritage of integrity and honor. When he finished, a sense of serenity washed over him. He rose and left the chapel, prepared to face the day. The path ahead would be arduous, strewn with obstacles. But he would not fear. By accepting his mortality, he had discovered the strength to truly live. He had found peace. A fragile, earned peace, yet peace all the same. He would carry it with him, a shield against darkness, a beacon of hope in a world of uncertainties. He would embrace each day as a treasure, a chance to serve Rome, to live ethically, and prepare for the journey ahead. He would live, truly live, until his last breath. Faustina's ghost. The brazier exhaled, a fragrant sigh of frankincense swirling into the chill of the nascent dawn. Marcus, shoulders slumped, wrestled with a wax tablet, the stylus a frigid extension of his hand. Duty, empire, governance, these were the intended subjects. But his thoughts, rebellious as any conquered province, insisted on charting a different course, the haunting shores of Faustina's memory. Months had passed since her image last breached his dreams, now, she commandeered his waking mind with relentless force. Her features, once so vividly etched in his memory, seemed to soften, the lines blurring like a rain-soaked Pompeian mural. He reached for a fresh tablet, desperate to seize her fleeting essence before it vanished completely. He recalled her laughter, a silvery chime that could pierce the thickest fog of courtly pretense. The phantom aroma of roses, eternally clinging to her, a testament to her beloved Tiber gardens, wafted through his senses. And the firm, reassuring pressure of her hand in his, a silent anchor in the storms of state. But the whispers, too, echoed in the chambers of his mind. Venomous rumors, painting her as adulterous, treasonous, lost to every depravity. He had refuted them, both in public and private. Love and trust had been his bulwarks. Yet, a serpent's sliver of doubt had always lurked beneath the surface. He plunged the stylus into warm wax, ready to pen not statecraft, but her. Faustina herself. A paradox, his Faustina. A captivating enigma woven from beauty and disquieting contradictions. Her intellect was keen, often surpassing his own in matters of strategy, yet she reveled in the shimmer of jewels, the whisper of silk, the ephemeral joys of court. Fiercely loyal to friends and family, her defense bordered on the reckless, still, shadows of treachery danced around her name. He hesitated, stylus poised. Was his memory betraying him, warping under the weight of rumor? He knew her ambition, her thirst for influence, the methods she sometimes embraced that his own rigid principles rejected. But he also knew her love, imperfect and complex as it was. And his own for her. He pressed on, striving for an honest reckoning. I loved her for her strength, her unwavering support, for her uncanny ability to see beyond the emperor's mask to the vulnerable man beneath. She knew my flaws, my anxieties, my hidden fears, and loved me despite, perhaps even because of, them. She was a mirror, reflecting not a god, but the fragile human I truly was. A wave of sorrow crashed over him, a tidal surge threatening to drown him whole. He squeezed his eyes shut, battling the tears that threatened to spill. Years had passed since her demise, yet the grief remained, a raw, throbbing ache. He remembered that day. The swift, merciless fever. He sat vigil, her hand clasped in his, uttering hollow comforts. He watched the light extinguish in her eyes, her life ebb away, leaving behind a husk. A profound void opened within him, an unfillable chasm. Yet, mingled with the grief, an unsettling relief. Her suffering was over. The suffocating burdens of empire, the relentless gaze of the court, the endless demands, were lifted. He sought solace in Stoic philosophy, its tenets his lifelong guide. He recited the natural cycle of death, the inevitable return to earth. He branded grief a weakness, a failure to accept fate. But the words were hollow. The pain persisted, a constant presence. He began to understand that grief wasn't weakness, but a testament to the depths of his love. To deny it was to deny his very humanity. He opened his eyes, gazing at the tablet. The words seemed inadequate, mere sketches of the vibrant woman he had known. He redipped the stylus and, this time, focused not on virtues or failings, but on the undeniable truth of her absence. She is gone. And the world is diminished. The sunlight seems fainter, the flowers less vibrant, the wine less fragrant. I wander the palace halls, and she is everywhere, in the tapestry she chose, the statues she admired, the gardens she cultivated. Her presence lingers, a haunting echo of what once was. He stopped, his hand shaking. He should cease this indulgence, attend to pressing matters. Yet, he was compelled, driven to plumb the depths of his sorrow, to confront the pain he so fiercely suppressed. I miss her. Her laughter, her wit, her intellect, her warmth. I miss her touch, her kiss, her embrace. The way she looked at me, a tapestry woven with love, amusement, and exasperation. The challenges, the questions, the relentless push to become a better man. His eyes closed once more, and this time the tears flowed freely, scalding his cheeks. He surrendered to the grief, allowing himself to drown in the pain of loss. It was unstoic, irrational, unbecoming of an emperor. But in that moment, he was not an emperor. He was simply a man, a bereaved husband, mourning his beloved wife. Eventually, the storm subsided. He wiped his face on his tunic sleeve and surveyed the tablet. The words blurred, smudged with tears, yet still legible. And as he deciphered them, a fragile peace began to bloom. He had faced his grief, acknowledged his pain, embraced the full weight of his loss. And in doing so, he had found a measure of solace. The pain would never vanish completely. The memory of Faustina would forever remain, a bittersweet reminder of what was. But he could endure. He could bear the burden of his grief without succumbing. He laid down the stylus and rose. The first tendrils of dawn crept through the windows, bathing the room in a soft, golden glow. He inhaled deeply, drawing in the cool morning air. He remained an emperor. Duties awaited, responsibilities beckoned. But he was also a man. One who had loved and lost, who had grieved and persevered. As he turned towards the rising sun, he knew he would carry Faustina's memory, not as a source of suffering, but as a source of strength. She would be his inspiration, his guide, his constant companion on the arduous path ahead. He turned, ready to confront the day. Faustina's ghost, for now, rested easier. And so, too, did he. At least, a little. The empire waited. And so did Commodus. The physician's concern. The emperor's study smelled of old paper and heated wax, a scent as familiar as the weight on Marcus's shoulders. Lamplight carved sharp angles into his face as he wrestled with a mountain of requests. The only sound was the scritch of his stylus, a counterpoint to the storm of worries brewing within. He kneaded his forehead, where a persistent ache throbbed. A discreet rap broke the silence. "Enter," he managed, his voice rough-edged. Galenus, his trusted physician, entered, a crease marring his brow. The leather of his medical satchel was softened by time and use. "Your Majesty," he greeted, his tone respectful yet laced with concern, "I requested this audience. I trust one haven't arrived at an inopportune moment." Marcus exhaled, setting aside his stylus with a clatter. "Inopportune. Your presence is never that, Galenus. Though, I confess, my wits are dull company this evening." He indicated a chair. "Please. Tell me what disturbs you." Galenus remained standing. "It's your well-being, Caesar. I've observed." He paused, searching for delicacy. "A certain, wan quality. A profound weariness. Beyond the natural toll of governance, I fear." Marcus dismissed this with a flick of his wrist. "Fatigue is a universal burden, Galenus, particularly for those who carry the empire. Wars rage on the borders, sedition simmers in the provinces, and the Senate plots its endless games. What else should one expect?" "I expect you to safeguard your strength, Caesar," Galenus retorted, his voice gaining firmness. "Rome requires your vitality. You cannot steer the ship of state from a sickbed." A mirthless smile touched Marcus's lips. "An astute analogy, physician. But I assure you, I am far from collapse. Merely, frayed around the edges. Still capable of fulfilling my obligations. With all due respect, Caesar, I question that. May I examine you?" Galenus moved closer, his gaze already dissecting Marcus's appearance. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus acquiesced. "Very well. But be swift. Time is a miser's treasure, even for one who wears the purple." He rose, granting Galenus access. The physician commenced his assessment with practiced efficiency. He took Marcus's pulse, his fingers lingering on the emperor's pulse point. He studied his eyes, noticing a faint yellow tinge in the whites. He palpated his abdomen, his touch gentle but purposeful. "Have you felt any pain, Caesar? Any digestive upsets?" Galenus inquired, maintaining an impartial tone. "An occasional twinge, the odd discomfort," Marcus conceded. "Nothing of consequence." Galenus's frown deepened. "And your sleep? Is it sufficient?" "Sleep?" Marcus gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sleep is a rare indulgence. And when it comes, my dreams are troubled." He offered no details, but Galenus understood the nature of those nocturnal torments. The weight of empire pressed down on Marcus's soul, offering little respite. Galenus straightened, his face etched with concern. "Caesar, I am genuinely worried. Your pulse is thready, your complexion ashen, and your answers, evasive. You are pushing yourself beyond endurance. You require rest, proper nourishment, and a lightening of your load." Marcus scoffed. "Lighten my load? You might as well ask the mountains to walk. Rome never slumbers, Galenus, and neither may its emperor." "But you are not an automaton, Caesar," Galenus pressed, his voice rising slightly. "You are mortal. With limitations. Should you disregard them, you will break. And where will that leave Rome?" Marcus turned to the window, his gaze fixed on the sprawling city below, now cloaked in darkness. "Rome will persevere, with or without me. Empires wax and wane. Such is the immutable order." "Perhaps," Galenus conceded. "But that offers no justification for accelerating its decline by neglecting your own health. You owe it to yourself, Caesar, as much as to Rome." "My duty to myself?" Marcus turned back, his eyes hardening with resolve. "My duty lies with Rome. With its citizens. With its destiny. My personal wants, my personal needs, are inconsequential." "But you cannot serve Rome if you are depleted," Galenus countered. "A debilitated body weakens the spirit. A failing emperor fathers a failing empire." Marcus remained unmoved. "I appreciate your solicitude, Galenus. But I assure you, I am capable of making reasoned choices regarding my health. I will rest when circumstance allows, eat when time permits, and continue to serve Rome with every fiber of my being. That is all." Galenus sighed, recognizing the futility of further argument. "Very well, Caesar. But I must implore you to consider my counsel. I shall prepare a restorative tonic and prescribe exercises to stimulate your circulation. Please, at least attempt them. Marcus gave a curt nod. I will consider it. Now, if you will excuse me, urgent matters demand my attention. He turned back to his desk, dismissing Galenus with a gesture. Galenus hesitated, then bowed his head in resignation. As you command, Caesar. But please, take care. He turned and departed, his heart heavy with foreboding. He knew Marcus too intimately to believe he would heed the warning. The emperor was a man consumed by obligation, prepared to sacrifice everything, even his own lifeblood, for the sake of Rome. Galenus simply feared he was sacrificing too much, teetering on the precipice of collapse. And he knew that if Marcus faltered, Rome would find itself on dangerous ground. Once more alone, Marcus stared unseeingly at the petitions before him, his thoughts churning. He knew Galenus spoke the truth. He was exhausted, bone-weary. But he could not yield. Not while wars loomed, revolts festered, and a son needed guidance. He grasped his stylus, his hand betraying a tremor. He had a promise to keep, a legacy to forge. And he would not permit his failing health to obstruct his path. The lamp sputtered, throwing elongated, spectral shadows across the room. The stylus resumed its scratching, a solitary sound echoing through the immense, hushed palace. The grip of anger. The persistent ache in his bones was a constant reminder of encroaching age, mirroring the empire's simmering discontent. Marcus, brow furrowed, wrestled with a wax tablet, the stylus feeling cumbersome in his aging fingers. He sought to craft a missive for Commodus, hoping his son might heed the hard-won wisdom within. But the words caught, snagged on a barbed memory, a scorching fragment from what he'd believed was a long-sealed past. Closing his eyes, he was instantly transported to the Senate chamber, many years prior, during the fledgling days of his reign. The air hung thick with swirling dust motes, illuminated by sunbeams slicing through the clerestory windows. A low drone of senatorial voices filled the vast space. He had been advocating for reform of the grain dole, a plan conceived to ease the suffering of Rome's teeming underclass. The opposition had been virulent, spearheaded by Senator Lucilius, a man whose corpulence strained the seams of his toga, his eyes glittering with unadulterated greed. Lucilius had been relentless in his assault, twisting Marcus's proposals, impugning his motives, portraying him as a naive dreamer divorced from the pragmatic realities of Roman power. Influenced by Lucilius's venomous pronouncements and their own vested interests, the senators had begun to voice their agreement. A pit formed in Marcus's stomach, a chilling premonition threatening to overwhelm him. He could almost taste the acrimony now, a bitter rising as he recalled Lucilius's final, dismissive thrust. So, Caesar, you would beggar Rome to coddle the indolent masses. Perhaps you should relinquish the throne and join them in their beggary. The word struck him like a physical blow to the gut. Something deep within him shuddered. He remembered the surge of blood to his face, the sudden, overwhelming impulse to silence Lucilius, to crush him beneath the sheer weight of his imperial authority. His grip tightened on the podium's edge, his knuckles bleaching white. The chamber fell hushed, every eye riveted on him. He yearned to erupt, to unleash the bottled fury that had been accumulating for weeks, months, perhaps even years. The ceaseless burden of war, the endless betrayals, the gnawing anxiety for Rome's future, all converged in that singular, volatile instant. He felt it now, a tide of raw, untamed rage. It was a monstrous force, a wild animal tearing at the confines of his hard-won restraint. He'd witnessed such fury corrupt others, transforming them into despots, into inhuman beings. He'd vowed never to succumb. Yet, in that moment, within the stifling confines of the Senate chamber, he teetered on the precipice. He had parted his lips to speak, ready to loose the torrent of his ire. Abruptly, an image flashed into his mind. The serene countenance of Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, remained unruffled even when confronted with the most egregious affronts. He recalled Antoninus's voice, gentle but resolute, reminding him of the paramount importance of reason, of forbearance, of equanimity. He recalled Epictetus, it is not events that disturb men, but their judgments about them. The recollection struck him like a jolt of frigid water to his overheated skin. The anger didn't vanish, but it ebbed, its potency diminished. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaled deeply, and when he opened them, his tone was modulated, composed. He addressed the Senate, not with wrath, but with measured logic. He calmly dismantled Lucilius's arguments, patiently illuminating the advantages of his planned reforms. He appealed to their sense of honor, to their solicitude for the welfare of the populace. The debate stretched on, arduous and protracted, but ultimately, he prevailed. The reforms were approved, albeit in a diluted form. He had triumphed, not through coercion, but through reasoned discourse. He had triumphed by mastering himself. The memory receded, leaving Marcus depleted yet strangely renewed. He now understood its resurgence. He faced a parallel struggle with Commodus. His son, too, was prone to fits of pique, to precipitate decisions, to a contempt for judicious thought. And Marcus feared that Commodus, unlike himself, lacked the essential discipline to bridle his own impulses. The blank wax tablet felt like a taunt. He knew he ought to commit to the wax words of guidance, of direction. But how to instill self-mastery in one who seemed incapable of it? How to impart the wisdom of the Stoics to a son who prized pleasure above all else? He lifted the stylus anew, his hand betraying a slight tremor. He would attempt it. He must. Even if his efforts proved futile, he could not condemn his son to the pernicious power of his own nature. He began to inscribe, deliberate, circumspect, choosing each word with precision. He wrote of the paramount importance of reason, of the imperative for introspection, of the inherent worth of virtue. He wrote of the ephemeral nature of delight, of the enduring potency of integrity. He recounted his own battles with anger, the instances when he had almost yielded to its dominance. He confessed his individual shortcomings, his personal failures. He desired Commodus to grasp that even an emperor was not impervious to the seductions of the flesh, to the allure of authority. He wrote of Antoninus, of the lessons gleaned from his adoptive sire. He wrote of the significance of surrounding oneself with sagacious and honorable counselors. He implored Commodus to heed their advice, to heed their warnings. He wrote of Epictetus, of Seneca, of the other Stoic philosophers who had steered him through the darkest chapters of his life. He exhorted Commodus to study their works, to embrace their teachings. He wrote of his paternal love for Commodus, a love unmarred by his son's defects. He begged him to choose the path of rectitude, to become the leader that Rome so desperately needed. As he wrote, a sense of serenity enveloped Marcus. He could not dictate Commodus's choices. He could not guarantee that his son would heed his supplications. Yet he could strive to guide him, to point out the proper course. And that, he realized, was the sum total of his power. The sun had begun its descent, casting elongated shadows throughout the chamber. Marcus completed the letter, affixed his imperial seal, and entrusted it to a servant. "Deliver this to my son," he directed, his voice fatigued yet resolute. "And pray that he may read it with an open mind." He pushed himself from his chair, his joints protesting with each movement. He ambled to the window and gazed out at Rome, saturated in the amber radiance of the twilight hour. It was a magnificent city, a bustling city, yet it was also a city riddled with venality, with inequality, with disquiet. He knew Rome's future hung precariously in the balance. He was aware that his own twilight approached. But he also knew that he had endeavored to the utmost to serve the empire, to govern with probity, to live in accordance with the tenets of Stoicism. And that, he reasoned, was sufficient. It must suffice. He closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. The pain in his joints lingered, but it no longer oppressed him. He had discovered a measure of tranquility, a sense of acquiescence. He was prepared for whatever lay ahead. He was prepared to confront his own mortality. He was prepared to relinquish his hold. He opened his eyes again and contemplated the city. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the nascent stars began to prick the night sky. He offered a smile, faint and burdened. The hold of anger had slackened. The weight of duty remained. And in the hushed sanctuary of his private chamber, Marcus Aurelius steeled himself for the coming day. A beggar's plea. A biting wind, a herald of winter's imminent arrival, tugged at Marcus's toga as he traversed the forum. The morning's review of Danubian frontier reports weighed heavily on him as he made his way back to the Palatine Hill. The empire's burden wasn't just paperwork, it saturated the very atmosphere, thick with a million anxieties. The forum, usually a vibrant spectacle of commerce, appeared muted, mirroring the emperor's own pensive mood. Merchants peddled their wares with dampened spirits, their voices hushed by the blustery air. Even children, normally a whirlwind of playful exuberance, engaged in their games with a subdued intensity. He paused, leaning on his ebony staff, its polished surface a cool anchor beneath his hand. He endeavored to ground himself, focusing on the wind's caress against his skin, the symphony of the city swirling around him, a stoic exercise in presence, a deliberate attempt to evade the vortex of future anxieties and past regrets. Abruptly, a figure peeled away from the temple of Saturn's shadowed embrace, a man reduced to mere vestiges. Emaciated, clad in tattered rags, and coated in grime, he limped forward, his gaze, twin embers in a skull-like face, locked on the emperor. A trembling hand extended, fingers gnarled like ancient roots. "Alms, Caesar," he rasped, his voice a frail whisper. A meager coin, to quell the gnawing hunger. Marcus scrutinized the petitioner, noting not just the visible destitution, the palpable suffering, but something else, a persistent spark of defiance, an ember of humanity that refused to be extinguished by poverty's crushing weight. His fingers found the familiar heft of his signet ring within the folds of his toga. He could have easily dismissed the men, directed a guard to remove him. He was, after all, the emperor, and such encounters were commonplace. He possessed advisors and entire departments to address such widespread deprivation. Alleviating every individual's suffering was not his sole burden. Yet, the stoic within, the man striving for virtue and reason, couldn't disregard the silent plea in those desperate eyes. He recalled Epictetus, who, even in enslavement, possessed an indomitable spirit. Seneca's words echoed in his mind, "Wherever a human being exists, there is an opportunity for kindness." He withdrew a handful of denarii, a sum exceeding the beggar's likely expectations, and pressed them into the trembling hand. Surprise widened the beggar's eyes, gratitude and disbelief warring across his gaunt features. "The gods bless you, Caesar," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "May they reward your benevolence." Marcus offered a slight inclination of his head, a near imperceptible nod. "May they guide you to a better fortune," he replied, his voice almost lost to the wind. As the beggar hobbled away, clutching his newfound wealth, a profound unease settled upon Marcus. The exchange had stirred a disquieting awareness of the vast gulf separating the privileged few from the countless many struggling for survival. He contemplated the lavish feasts he attended, the extravagant gifts lavished upon him, the sheer affluence that defined life on the Palatine. He envisioned the senators, draped in finery, endlessly debating affairs of state, often oblivious to the everyday tribulations of the common citizen. How could he, a champion of virtue and justice, reconcile himself to such glaring inequity? How could he govern an empire where unimaginable luxury coexisted with starvation in the streets? He knew the familiar arguments, the justifications mouthed by those benefiting from the status quo, that poverty was an unavoidable fate, a product of personal failings, that charity was merely a temporary reprieve, not a solution, and that true advancement resided in grand designs and economic overhauls. But these pronouncements rang hollow. They were academic abstractions, divorced from the raw reality of the beggar's plea. They were comfortable excuses for inaction, for averting one's gaze. Marcus knew he could not, alone, eradicate poverty. The roots were too deep, the problem too intricate for simple solutions. Yet, he could not simply stand idly by. He had a duty, as emperor and as a man, to ease suffering wherever possible, to foster justice and compassion, to forge a more equitable society. The question was, how to begin? He had already enacted numerous measures aimed at aiding the impoverished and vulnerable, reducing taxes, providing famine relief, establishing havens for orphans and the aged. Yet these were mere palliatives. The core issue lay deeper, within the corruption and avarice that permeated every echelon of Roman society. He thought of senators enriching themselves at the state's expense, tax collectors bleeding the poor dry, merchants profiting from misfortune. His own court teemed with sycophants and schemers, each vying for position and influence. Could he realistically expect to establish a just and fair society when those in positions of authority were driven by self-interest? Could he cleanse the Augean stables of Roman corruption when the filth was so deeply entrenched? He sighed, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down with renewed force. He recognized the formidable task ahead, the resistance he would face from entrenched powers. But shirking his duty was unthinkable. He had sworn to serve the Roman people, a vow he would not betray, even at the cost of his own comfort and security. Straightening his shoulders, he fixed his gaze on the distant horizon. The wind still buffeted him, but its chill no longer penetrated. A fresh resolve had taken hold, a renewed determination to fight for justice and compassion, to build a better world. He would begin by confronting the rot within his own court, holding those who abused their power accountable. He would intensify his efforts to reform the tax system, ensuring a fairer distribution of the burden. And he would continue to seek wisdom from the Stoic philosophers, cultivating virtue within himself, so that he might lead by example and inspire others. As he walked toward the Palatine Hill, he acknowledged the long and arduous journey ahead. But he knew he wasn't alone, bolstered by the support of his advisors, his friends, and above all, his own conscience. He clung to the conviction that, even against overwhelming odds, a difference could be made, that he could leave the world a little brighter than he found it. The memory of the beggar's plea would serve as a constant reminder of that unyielding duty. The cynic's challenge. The beggar's haunted gaze clung to Marcus long after his return to the Palatine. He found himself restless, pacing the mosaic floors of his study, the imperial purple feeling like a leaden shroud. Justice, equity, the very words felt hollow, echoing in the vast chasm separating the opulent heights of the palace from the city's shadowed alleys. His thoughts, unwelcome yet insistent, drifted back years, to an encounter nearly forgotten. Diogenes. Not the legendary cynic of old, but a modern echo, a philosopher who dared to confront the emperor. He recalled the humid press of the Roman summer, the air thick with dust and the savory tang of street vendors' fare. He was overseeing the construction of a new bath complex, intended to elevate the lives of his citizenry. Encircled by his Praetorian guard, a figure of remote power, he had been listening to the architect. Then, a voice, raw and piercing, shattered the polite murmur. Aurelius. Cease erecting monuments to vanity, attend to those in genuine need. Marcus pivoted to see a figure leaning against an unfinished column. Rags clung to his gaunt frame. Matted hair framed a wild beard, but it was his eyes that arrested attention, burning with unsettling fervor. A staff and a worn leather satchel were his only possessions. The Praetorian guard surged forward, but Marcus halted them with a gesture. Let him speak. Curiosity, tinged perhaps with imperial hubris, drove the command. He'd faced down barbarian hordes, surely, he could endure the harangue of a madman. You build baths, the cynic spat, while men starve. Marble graces the city while families fester in crumbling walls. You preach virtue, emperor, but your deeds are a lie. Accustomed to the fawning pronouncements of courtiers, Marcus found himself strangely captivated by the man's insolence. And what, then, would you have me do? He asked, his tone even, masking a prickle of irritation. Discard your purple, the cynic declared, forsake your palace, and embrace my life. Only then can you grasp the true meaning of virtue. A ripple of reaction spread through the crowd. Some gasped at the defiance, others snickered at the outlandish proposal. Marcus, however, remained a mask of composure. That is a simplistic answer, he countered, and utterly impractical. I am emperor. My duty is to govern, to maintain order, to defend the empire. Order, the cynic scoffed. What order exists where some gorge themselves while others wither? What protection do you offer those crushed by your taxes and laws? Marcus sighed inwardly. The cynic's words, he knew, contained a seed of truth. The empire was vast, its inequalities undeniable. Yet, he clung to the belief that he was striving to ease suffering, to forge a more equitable society. I am imperfect, he conceded, yet I strive for betterment. I seek to rule with wisdom and compassion, to serve the Roman people. Compassion. The cynic spat again, the gesture sharp and dismissive. Compassion is a trinket for those who've never known true hardship. You sit enthroned, swathed in sycophancy, deluding yourself that you comprehend the plight of the wretched. The cynic then launched into a searing dissection of Stoicism, its principles laid bare with ruthless precision. He accused Marcus of hiding behind philosophical pronouncements, employing them as a shield against the world's brutal realities. You preach acceptance, he challenged, but acceptance of what? Of injustice. Of inequality. Of suffering. Is that virtue, or merely a convenient cloak for inaction? Though shaken, Marcus refused to yield ground. Stoicism teaches control over what we can influence, acceptance of what we cannot. We cannot eradicate suffering, but we can lessen it. We can strive to live virtuously, act justly, treat others with kindness. Empty rhetoric, the cynic roared, his voice echoing off the stone. You are a prisoner of your power, Aurelius, so blinded by the trappings of empire you've forgotten what it means to be human. With that, he turned and vanished into the gathering crowd. Marcus watched him depart, a strange cocktail of anger and reluctant admiration churning within him. He dismissed the cynic as a madman, an agitator, a pest. But his words lingered, a relentless barb. Now, years later, the encounter resurfaced with renewed intensity. The challenge echoed. Was he truly living by his own tenets? Was he doing enough to wrestle injustice? Or was he, as the cynic claimed, merely hiding? He crossed to his writing desk, its oak surface worn smooth, marred by ink stains, bearing the marks of countless nights. He picked up his stylus, selected a fresh wax tablet. He began to inscribe, slowly, deliberately, his thoughts spiraling onto the wax in a torrent of introspection. He questioned the core of his motivations. Was he truly serving Rome or merely perpetuating his own reign? Was he acting from genuine empathy, or from a yearning to be perceived as a virtuous leader? He considered Commodus. Was paternal love blinding him to his son's defects? Was the stability of the empire being placed ahead of the people by naming him heir? The condition of the empire weighed on him. Was he battling the corruption within the Senate and bureaucracy with enough force? Was his dedication to justice mere lip service? The questions assaulted him, relentless and unforgiving. He wrote deep into the night, driven by a desperate craving for self-understanding, a clarification of his duty, an understanding of true virtue. As dawn broke, bleeding pale light across the sky, Marcus finally put down his stylus. No easy solutions presented themselves. But a renewed purpose had taken root. He would not abandon his station, as the cynic had urged. He would not shed his imperial robes and become a beggar. He was the emperor, bound by the responsibility to rule. But he would become a better emperor. He would heed the voices of the unheard with greater care. He would wage a fiercer war against corruption. He would strive to cultivate a fairer society. He would not be swayed by flattery or cowed by reproach. He would remain faithful to his principles, even when challenging, even when unpopular. He would accept the transient nature of all things, including his own mortality, and strive to fill each day with virtue and integrity. He would, in essence, strive to earn the title of emperor, to honor the legacy of those who came before, to justify the faith of the Roman people. And he would do so, not from fear of divine judgment or the censure of posterity, but because it was the right path. Because it was his duty. Because it was the sole route to inner peace within a world riddled with chaos. The memory of the cynic's challenge, once a source of self-doubt, became a constant prompter of self-examination, a reminder to examine his motivations, an urging towards moral conduct in all actions. Marcus rose, his body heavy with exhaustion, his spirit lighter. He walked to the window, gazing out at Rome sprawling beneath the dawn. He saw not merely a city of marble and grand structures, but a city inhabited by people, their dreams and aspirations, their hardships and sorrows interwoven. And he knew his responsibility was to serve, to safeguard, to guide them, with every fiber of his being, for the span of his life. The distant plague. The wax tablet chilled Marcus's hand. The hasty script detailed a virulent fever, skin turned black as pitch, a harvest grimly gathered by disease, not reaping hook. The dispatch, borne by exhausted riders from Pannonia's distant fields, descended on him like a pall. Another trial, another burden to bear. He set down the tablet, lamplight painting the walls of his sanctum with grotesque, shifting shapes. The air, usually comforting with its blend of beeswax and aged vellum, now felt oppressive, almost poisonous. He sought the window, his gaze drawn to the sprawling metropolis. Rome. A titan of stone and spirit, teeming with life. Now a potential charnel house. The weight of his imperial mantle settled heavily, a burden far exceeding any breastplate. He dreaded not the clash of steel nor the viper's nest of courtly intrigue, but the insidious, invisible foe that could cripple an empire. The specter of the Antonine plague, decades gone, still haunted the collective memory, a stark lesson in mortality's dominion. History would not repeat itself, not under his stewardship. Summon Galen, he rasped, his voice barely cutting through the city's nocturnal murmur. And Marius Valerius. At once. Turning back, his eyes swept across familiar touchstones, a bust of Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, a silent mentor in marble, the well-worn Enchiridion, its pages flagged and foxed with ink, the simple desk where so many decrees, so many private thoughts had taken form. These were his anchors, reminding him of the virtues he sought to embody: wisdom, justice, fortitude, restraint. He would need them all. First came Galen, his personal physician, anxiety etched onto his features. The celebrated healer, his Hellenic accent still clinging to his words after years in Rome, bowed low. Imperator. The reports, are they as dire as rumor suggests? Marcus nodded, offering the tablet. Judge for yourself. I need your insights, your counsel. We must act with speed and resolve. Galen's brow creased as he devoured the message, his lips moving in a silent recitation of the horrors described. He looked up, his eyes reflecting professional detachment, a vital armor against the daily onslaught of suffering. The symptoms, they indicate a particularly aggressive strain. Highly communicable. We must impose quarantines, Imperator. Restrict movement. Secure provisions. Diversions are already underway, Marcus affirmed. Foodstuffs, medicaments, potable water. But it will be insufficient. We need more. Much more. Marius Valerius, prefect of the grain supply, entered, his face the color of old parchment. A man known for his cool efficiency, even he appeared unnerved. Imperator, he began, his voice strained. The granaries are replete, but, ensuring equitable distribution while preventing further contagion, it presents a considerable obstacle. Obstacles are what define us, Marcus countered, his voice firm. We shall confront this as we have all others, with valor, with purpose, with sound judgment. Marius, I require a comprehensive assessment of our reserves. What surplus can we allocate? The speed of transport. And, critically, how do we guarantee its arrival to those most vulnerable, untainted by graft or exploitation? A flicker of assurance crossed Marius's face at the clear directives. I shall begin forthwith, Imperator. A full report will be delivered by dawn. Marcus returned to Galen. What of the afflicted? What salves can we offer their pain? I shall convene with my colleagues without delay, Imperator, Galen assured him. We shall scrutinize the reports, dissect the symptoms, and formulate the most efficacious treatments conceivable. But I must be candid. This pestilence, it is unyielding. Many will succumb. The words hung in the stillness, laden with unacknowledged truths. Marcus closed his eyes, acknowledging the inevitable. Death was an intrinsic part of existence, an immutable cycle. A truth he had long internalized. Yet, acceptance offered little solace against the sting of loss, the despair of witnessing misery. Do all that you can, Galen, he urged, reopening his eyes. Mitigate suffering where you find it. Extend comfort, offer hope. And remember, even within the clutches of death, dignity remains. He spent the remaining hours immersed in maps, troop dispositions, supply manifests. He dispatched envoys to neighboring provinces, pleading for assistance. He formulated decrees, establishing quarantine zones and regulating prices. Driven by a relentless sense of duty that eclipsed personal need, he labored tirelessly. As the sky began to lighten, brushed with strokes of coral and gold, he finally indulged in a moment of respite. He stepped onto the balcony, overlooking the awakening city. The air felt sharp and clean, carrying the mingled scents of wood smoke and warm bread. He observed a young mother bargaining for produce. He saw children chasing pigeons in the forum. He saw life, indomitable and vibrant, pushing forward against the encroaching shadows. He knew he couldn't safeguard them all. He knew that suffering and death were inevitable. But he could strive to lessen the blow, to ease the torment, to preserve Rome's enduring spirit. He returned to his study, his heart heavy, yet his resolve reinforced. He picked up his stylus and began to write. Not edicts or commands, but words of consolation, words of encouragement, words of solidarity. He would address the citizens of Rome directly, not as their emperor, but as a fellow mortal, grappling with the same trials, the same anxieties. He wrote of the necessity of courage, of resilience, of communal bonds. He emphasized the need for composure, for adherence to official directives, for mutual support during this crisis. He wrote of remembering their shared humanity, of extending kindness and respect, even amidst fear and uncertainty. He concluded with a simple plea: let us confront this challenge together, with strength, with wisdom, and with unwavering faith in the imperishable spirit of Rome. He sealed the letter with his ring and entrusted it to a waiting messenger. Have this proclaimed in every forum, every marketplace, every public space. Let the people know that I stand with them. That we face this ordeal united. As the messenger departed, Marcus felt a flicker of hope, a fragile light in the gathering gloom. He knew the path ahead would be arduous and long. But Rome had weathered far worse, and had invariably emerged stronger. He would dedicate every fiber of his being to ensuring its survival once more. Later that day, he made a personal visit to one of the newly established quarantine zones. The scene that unfolded was one of abject misery. Makeshift shelters crowded the streets, housing the sick and the dying. The air hung thick with the cloying stench of disease and despair. He moved among the afflicted, offering words of solace and hope. He listened to their narratives, their terrors, their aspirations. He touched their hands, a small act of human connection in a time of isolation. Some recoiled, fearing infection. Others wept with gratitude, overwhelmed by his presence. He remained unflinching, unwavering. A symbol of hope amidst the desolation. An elderly woman, her face ravaged by the contagion, reached out to him, her hands trembling. "Imperator," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for remembering us." Marcus knelt beside her, his eyes filled with empathy. "I will never forget you," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "You are all citizens of Rome. Your well-being is my sacred duty." He remained in the quarantine zone for hours, until the sun dipped below the horizon. As he prepared to leave, a young boy approached him, his face stained with tears. "Imperator," he stammered, his voice shaking. "My mother, she is gravely ill. Will she die?" Marcus gazed at the boy, his heart aching. He couldn't offer false promises. He couldn't guarantee her survival. But he could offer something just as valuable, his compassion, his understanding, his unwavering support. He knelt and placed his hand on the boy's slender shoulder. "I cannot foresee what tomorrow brings," he said, his voice gentle. "But I pledge this, I will dedicate every resource at my disposal to helping your mother. And even if she doesn't recover, know that she will never be forgotten. Her memory will endure, in your heart, and in the hearts of all who knew and cherished her." He departed the quarantine zone burdened by sorrow, yet also filled with renewed resolve. The plague was a devastating scourge, a crippling blow to the empire. But it also presented an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate the true mettle of Rome, the unyielding spirit of its people, the profound meaning of compassion and leadership. He would confront this crisis as he had faced all others, with valor, with integrity, and with unshakable faith in Rome's destiny. He would not allow the plague to define his reign. He would define it. Commodus's shadow. The sharp tang of burning juniper, intended to purify the air and banish the pestilence, permeated Marcus's toga, a persistent, bitter reminder of Pannonia's agony. Alone in his study, he found the wax tablets and scrolls, inventories of depleted granaries and troop deployments, repulsive in their untouched state. His thoughts, a chaotic melee of their own, stubbornly resisted focusing on immediate necessities, instead circling the looming issue of Commodus, his son. Even the name felt like a sour note in the symphony of Roman duty. He rose, crossing to the window, his gaze drawn to the Palatine Hill, its iconic splendor veiled by a thick city haze. Rome, the eternal city, seemed vulnerable tonight, prey not only to disease but to an internal corruption that, he dreaded, wore his son's face. He recalled a younger Commodus, bright and intelligent, eager for approval. A certain effervescence, a captivating charm, had always defined him. Marcus had nurtured these qualities, encouraging artistic and philosophical pursuits. But somewhere along that path, sweetness had soured, replaced by an insatiable need for acclaim, almost grotesque in its intensity. The arena's brutal contests, the thunder of chariot races, the excessive banquets, these were Commodus's domains, where he reveled in the crowd's roar, fueled by their misplaced adoration. He yearned for fleeting glory, not the grinding labor of statesmanship. The empire's burdens, endless negotiations, agonizing decisions, seemed beyond his capacity. Marcus pivoted from the window, the image of Commodus, costumed as a gladiator, feebly striking a training dummy, imprinted on his mind. A pathetic parody of strength, a hollow mimicry of the virtues he'd sought to instill. He settled back into his chair, the leather groaning beneath him. The day's consultations with Galen and Marius Valerius replayed in his mind, their expressions etched with apprehension, their voices thick with worry. The plague was a formidable adversary, yet one he could grapple with. He could strategize, allocate resources, appeal to his people's better nature. But Commodus was an enigma, an elemental force beyond his grasp. He picked up a stylus, its cool touch a small solace against his sweating palm. He began to compose, not an official order, but a personal reflection, a desperate attempt at clarity amidst his anxieties. Begin each day by telling yourself, I will encounter meddling, thanklessness, impudence, disloyalty, malice, and selfishness, all stemming from their ignorance of good and evil. The words felt stale, insufficient. He knew this. He had lived it. He had articulated it countless times. Yet, acknowledging it and accepting it were different, especially when the offender was his heir, Rome's future. He thought of his predecessors, the Antonines, wise and virtuous rulers who guided Rome through treacherous waters. They had chosen their successors based on merit, not blood, ensuring the empire's stability and prosperity. He, however, was shackled by tradition, by the expectation that his son would ascend the throne. Had he failed Commodus? Had he been too permissive, too lenient? Or was it inherent, a flaw no amount of discipline could correct? He remembered a conversation with Fronto, his old mentor, years prior. Fronto had cautioned against unchecked ambition, the seductive allure of power. A ruler who seeks only affection, Fronto had warned, will soon find himself despised. Had Commodus succumbed to this? Was his craving for applause blinding him to the true demands of leadership? He closed his eyes, the weight of his unease a tangible pressure. He yearned for Epictetus's peace, the serenity found in accepting the unchangeable. But how could he accept Rome's potential decline, the undoing of all he had labored to achieve? You possess dominion over your mind, not external occurrences. Understand this, and strength will be yours. He wrote the words slowly, deliberately absorbing their meaning. He could not dictate Commodus's actions, but he could govern his own response. He could continue to guide, to instruct, to hope that, even now, his son might rise to the occasion. But hope, he knew, was treacherous. It could obscure reality, the hard truths that must be confronted. He had to prepare for the worst, to accept that Commodus might prove unfit. What then? Could he name a different successor? Would the Senate endorse such a radical deviation? The notion sent a chill through him. A perilous gamble, one that could ignite civil war. He opened his eyes, staring at the wax tablet, the inscription blurred by unshed tears. He was ensnared, torn between his devotion to his son and his fealty to Rome. He considered his own mortality, the impermanence of life. Recent bouts of illness were a stark reminder of his limited time. What legacy would he leave? Would history remember him as the emperor who quelled the plague or the one who doomed Rome by seating his son on the throne? He dipped his stylus, his hand trembling slightly. He had to discover a path, one that would lead Rome to safety, even at the cost of his own desires, his own tranquility. Do not squander your remaining days speculating about others, unless it serves a greater good. Pondering so-and-so's activities, the reasons behind this or that, what A is saying, what B is thinking, C's latest scheme, these are distractions that divert you from your true purpose. His true purpose, to govern with wisdom, to lead with mercy, to leave Rome fortified. That was paramount. He would continue to mentor Commodus, to shape him, to prepare him for power. But he would remain vigilant, observant, ready to intervene should his son's deficiencies threaten Rome. It was an immense burden, a weight threatening to crush him. Yet, he would bear it, as he had borne so many others, with courage, with stoic fortitude. For Rome's sake, for his people, he would not yield. He would confront Commodus's shadow, and he would not flinch. He would act rightly, even if it shattered his heart. The storm within. The wind, a savage predator, mauled the imperial tent's canvas. A banshee wail echoed through the fabric, laced with ozone and the frigid drizzle sweeping across Pannonia. Inside, Marcus Aurelius, his shoulders stooped, wrestled with a blank wax tablet on a humble wooden desk. The lamplight, unsteady, painted elongated, shifting figures on the tent's interior. Outside, the tempest roared, its fury escalating. Brief, violent strobes of lightning illuminated a rain-drenched panorama, highlighting the mud-choked earth and the clustered forms of Roman soldiers seeking some scant protection. Legionaries, paragons of discipline ordinarily, shifted with a palpable unease, their faces etched with worry. Even hardened veterans betrayed the storm's unsettling influence, a sentiment mirrored in Marcus' own heart. The external tumult was but an echo of the chaos churning within him. He shoved the tablet aside, the grating sound a jarring note in the tent's confines. A vice seemed to grip his chest, an unwelcome, constant companion. The plague was a relentless tormentor, yes, but it was the crushing weight of Rome itself, amplified by the grim premonition that his carefully cultivated empire teetered on the precipice of ruin under Commodus' future rule. Rising, the emperor's joints offered a symphony of complaint. He shuffled to the tent opening and gazed out at the maelstrom. The gale ripped at his cloak, the rain lashed his face, yet he hardly registered the physical discomfort. A profound isolation had taken root, blooming into a stark, undeniable truth. Not a lack of company, loyal advisors, trusted generals, even the ever-present Commodus surrounded him. But he stood alone beneath the burden, the agonizing choices, the knowledge that the destiny of millions balanced precariously on his weary frame. No one could truly comprehend the weight, the grueling decisions, the perpetual battle against his own demons. Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, a man revered and emulated, surfaced in his thoughts. Even Antoninus, with his legendary calm and unwavering dedication, seemed to harbor a trace of melancholy, a hint of the sacrifices demanded by the throne. Had he, too, felt this crushing weight, this same chilling solitude? He released the flap, sealing out the worst of the elements. Returning to the meager lamplight, the shadows now felt like encroaching jailers, their silent judgment palpable. His gaze settled on a small, exquisitely crafted wooden box upon his desk. Lifting it, his fingers traced the ingrained patterns. Inside, cushioned by faded velvet, lay a collection of treasured relics, a strand of his mother's hair, a smooth, unassuming stone collected from the Tiber's edge during his childhood, and a letter from his beloved Faustina, penned shortly before her passing. He unfolded the letter, a familiar ache blooming in his soul. Faustina's words, rendered in her elegant hand, seemed to leap from the page, brimming with love, wisdom, and a profound understanding of his burdens. She had been his anchor, his confidant, the one soul who saw past the emperor to the men. Marcus. My dearest Marcus, the letter began, I see the weight you bear, the sacrifices you willingly make. Do not let it break you. Remember the virtues you hold sacred, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Let them serve as your guiding stars, even when the path ahead is obscured. And remember, my love, even the mightiest oak bows before the tempest. Find solace in the small joys, the world's inherent beauty, the love that sustains you. Know that I am forever with you, in spirit, watching over you in our beloved Rome. Tears blurred his vision, obscuring the delicate script. He folded the letter, clutching it to his breast. Faustina's words, though years old, offered a fragile beacon in the gathering darkness. He wasn't utterly alone. He had his memories, his principles, the enduring love of those who came before. He inhaled deeply, seeking to regain his composure. Despair was a luxury he couldn't afford. He owed a debt to Rome, to its people, to himself. He must navigate this storm, both internal and external. Returning to the desk, he retrieved the wax tablet. This time, words flowed freely, pouring from his heart and mind. He wrote of the storm, its overwhelming power, its unbridled rage, yet also its ephemeral nature. He wrote of resilience, of discovering strength amidst adversity, of accepting the immutable. He composed a meditation on mortality, not as a termination, but as a natural transition, a shift from one plane to another. He wrote of living each day with intent and purpose, of striving for self-improvement, of leaving the world a fraction better than he found it. As he wrote, the tempest gradually subsided. The wind's hull softened, the rain eased to a gentle patter, the lightning lessened its ferocious displays. By the time he finished, the first tentative fingers of dawn were piercing the clouds, painting the eastern horizon with strokes of rose and gold. He gazed out at the nascent dawn, a weary tranquility settling upon him. The storm had passed, leaving a world cleansed and reborn. And within, the inner turmoil had begun to dissipate. He knew the trials ahead loomed large, the path fraught with peril. But he would meet them head-on, armed with his values, his recollections, and the indomitable force of the human will. He knew the sun would rise anew, bringing with it a fresh opportunity to serve Rome, to guide Commodus, and to forge a legacy of wisdom and righteousness. He would not succumb to the inner storm. He would weather it, emerging stronger on the other side. The weight of duty remained, but it was now tempered with renewed conviction and a quiet acceptance of his own transience. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, fatigued, but resolute, was prepared. Epictetus's solace. The vellum, delicate as moth wings, crackled under his weathered fingertips. Though the ink had faded to sepia, the words pulsed with their original force. He was huddled at his desk in the secluded study, the anemic glow of beeswax doing little to combat the creeping dampness that had settled in his marrow. Not merely age's intrusion, although that was a persistent ache, an unwanted roommate. This was the frigidity of spirit, the insidious chill of doubt threatening to smother the embers of his conviction. He coaxed a flicker more light from the lamp, illuminating the open pages. Epictetus. The touchstone he'd sought countless times, a soothing unguent for a troubled heart. Tonight, the wisdom felt crucial, a sturdy hand in a turbulent sea. Men are disturbed not by things, but by their judgment about things. He traced the script, the stark truth vibrating within him. Commodus wasn't, in essence, the root of his torment. It was his own appraisal of Commodus, the dread of what his son might unleash upon Rome, the chaos he might sow, the weight of empire, the stewardship of millions, pressed down with agonizing force, amplified by the gnawing sense that his heir was tragically unfit. He closed his eyes, summoning the image of Commodus as a boy, a bright, exuberant child brimming with laughter and affection. Where had that innocence gone? At what point had vanity and excess eclipsed the virtues he and Faustina had so diligently tried to cultivate? The question lingered, an unanswered lament for shattered hopes. He opened his eyes, returning to the text. It is not events that disturb men, but their judgments about them. For example, death is nothing dreadful, or else Socrates would have thought so. But the judgment that death is dreadful, this is the dreadful thing. Mortality. It stalked him, an ever-lengthening shadow. He'd felt its icy graze during the plague, witnessed its random scythe sweep through legionaries, citizens, comrades. He'd met it then with a certain stoicism, accepting it as an inherent part of existence. Now, with the empire poised on a knife's edge, the prospect of his own passing evoked a different species of horror. Not fear of oblivion, but the dread of leaving Rome vulnerable, prey to the whims of an impetuous sovereign. He drew a deep breath, focusing on the expansion and contraction of his lungs. Epictetus's words were a steadfast beacon. Death itself held no intrinsic terror, only the terror of death could enslave him. He had to shed the preconceptions, the emotional baggage that muddied his clarity, and confront the inevitable with calm resolve. He read on, demand not that events should happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. More easily prescribed than practiced, he mused wryly. To embrace the natural course, to surrender control, defied every instinct forged in his role as emperor. He was accustomed to shaping reality, to bending circumstance to his will. Yet, the Stoics maintained that true liberation resided not in mastery over the external world, but in governing one's internal landscape. He couldn't remake Commodus, not entirely. He couldn't guarantee Rome's destiny. But he could govern his own responses, his own judgments, his own actions in the present. He reached for his stylus and a clean sheet. The storm outside had escalated, the wind a keening cry that shook the shutters. But within, a fragile serenity was taking root. He would not be capsized by the tempest. He would ground himself in the principles that had defined him: reason, integrity, justice, and acceptance. He began to inscribe, his hand moving deliberately across the surface. A new reflection, a rumination on the essence of acceptance and the demands of duty. He wrote about the importance of focusing on the sphere of his influence, of striving for virtue in the face of hardship, of acknowledging the transient nature of all things. He paused, scrutinizing his phrasing. Was he truly prepared to accept whatever fate had in store, for himself, for Rome? The answer, he knew, was nuanced. He would continue to persevere, to guide, to safeguard, to the best of his abilities. But he would also relinquish the delusion of absolute control, conceding that the ultimate outcome rested beyond his grasp. He thought of Faustina, her gentle smile, her unwavering faith. Her love had been an enduring refuge, a reminder of the virtue that permeated the world, even amidst the shadows. He missed her with a profound ache, a familiar grief. But even in his mourning, he discovered solace in the knowledge that their bond had transcended the limits of mortality. It persisted in his memories, his deeds, the values he had endeavored to instill in their offspring. He wrote of her now, of her sagacity and grace, of the lessons she had imparted about tenderness and empathy. He wrote of the imperative to treasure the present, to find joy in small blessings, to appreciate the beauty that surrounded him, even in the midst of anguish. As he wrote, the storm began to abate, the wind softening to a sigh. The first tendrils of dawn slipped through the shutters, bathing the study in a soft, amber glow. He lifted his gaze from his work, feeling a tranquility he had not experienced for weeks. He revisited the passage from Epictetus one final time: remember that you must behave in life as at a banquet. Is anything brought round to you? Put out your hand, and take your share with moderation. Does it pass you? Do not stop it. Is it not yet come? Do not stretch your desire towards it, but wait till it is offered you. A faint smile touched his lips. Life was, indeed, a feast, and he had been privileged to sample its varied offerings. He had known affection, camaraderie, triumph, and authority. He had also known bereavement, pain, and disillusionment. But through it all, he had striven for integrity, to act with righteousness, to remain faithful to himself and to the tenets he held sacred. He knew that daunting trials lay ahead. Commodus remained a source of grave apprehension, and the stability of Rome was far from assured. But he would confront these challenges with renewed fortitude, drawing upon the wisdom of the Stoics, the memory of Faustina, and an unwavering trust in the power of reason and virtue. He closed the scroll of Epictetus, placing it aside. Dawn had broken, and a new day beckoned. He had a purpose to fulfill, a kingdom to preside over, a legacy to secure. He arose, his body weary, but his spirit refreshed. He would face the day with courage and composure, embracing whatever it might hold. Accomplishments and failures. Tonight, the stylus possessed a different gravity. Not in mass, but burdened by the passage of years, by choices carved not merely into wax tablets, but into the very essence of Rome itself. Marcus halted, the lamplight sketching elongated, shifting figures across his study walls. He had intended to inscribe words of probity, of obligation, those touchstones that had, however falteringly, steered him through the imperial maze. Yet, the words constricted in his throat, stifled by specters of paths not taken. His eyelids lowered, conjuring the Carnuntum battlefield, the cloying reek of gore and burning flesh permeating the air. Victory had been dearly bought, the Marcomanni repulsed, the Danube secured, for the moment. He recalled the legion's roar, the citizens' faces alight with relief, their dread of invasion quelled. A triumph, undoubtedly. He had shielded the Republic, defended its territories, safeguarded its populace. But then arose the insidious murmurs, accusations that stung like nettles. Accusations of brutality, gratuitous carnage. Had his hand been too heavy? Had the price of triumph been too steep? He had decreed the execution of insurgent leaders, sanctioned the enslavement of captives. Necessary sacrifices, he had rationalized. The cost of quiescence. But the visages of the captured children, their eyes wide pools of terror, still haunted his slumber. He opened his eyes, the vision receding, replaced by the familiar sanctuary of his study, scrolls stacked precisely upon their shelves. He traced the worn surface of his writing desk, the wood smoothed by years of constant use. To be just, to govern with wisdom and empathy, had been his aspiration. He had overhauled the legal framework, safeguarded the rights of the enslaved, founded philanthropic institutions. Meritorious endeavors, surely. Yet, even these accomplishments bore blemishes. Progress had been glacial, obstructed at every turn by entrenched senators guarding their prerogatives. Protection for the enslaved remained circumscribed, hemmed in by the deeply rooted mores of Roman society. The charities, though laudable in intent, had proven insufficient to alleviate the rampant destitution and hardship afflicting the empire. And then Commodus, his son. His paramount failure. The realization landed like a physical blow, robbing him of breath. He had striven, heaven knows he had striven, to instill within Commodus stoic virtues, principles of equity, a sense of duties imperative. He had surrounded him with astute advisors, afforded him the finest tutelage, lavished him with affection. Yet, Commodus remained distant, intractable, captivated by earthly delights, the allure of authority, the honeyed words of flatterers. Marcus remembered the day the full extent of his son's deficiencies had become starkly apparent. A military parade, a grand spectacle intended to impress foreign emissaries. Commodus, then a youth, had shown more interest in the tumblers and jesters than the legion's might and discipline. He had chortled and applauded, oblivious to the solemnity of the occasion, the burden of command that would one day be his. Marcus had drawn him aside, speaking with uncharacteristic severity, urging him to embrace his responsibilities. Commodus had merely shrugged, a defiant spark in his eyes. "Why such solemnity, father?" he had queried. "Life is meant to be savored." The words landed like a prophecy, foretelling the calamity to come. He had sought to guide his son, to sculpt him into the emperor Rome required. Yet, his efforts had been futile. Commodus remained willful, impetuous, utterly unfit to govern. Marcus exhaled, the weight of his paternal failings crushing him. He had failed as a sire, a failure that threatened to dismantle all his imperial achievements. An unbearable prospect. He retrieved his stylus, his hand quivering almost imperceptibly. He must write. He must leave behind some account of his meditations, his struggles, his hopes for the future. Even should Commodus prove a despot, a bane to Rome, perhaps his writings might serve as a compass for future generations, a reminder of the virtues that had once guided the empire's hand. He began to write, haltingly at first, then with increasing ease. He wrote of reason's imperative, of the necessity of justice, of the mastery of self. He wrote of accepting the unchangeable, of concentrating on what lay within one's sphere of influence. He wrote of life's ephemerality, of death's inevitability. As he wrote, a sense of inner calm began to descend. He could not alter the past. He could not dictate the future. But he could govern his own thoughts, his own actions. He could strive to live honorably, to fulfill his obligations to the utmost of his capabilities. And that, he understood, was all that truly mattered. He paused, re-examining his words. It was not a grand pronouncement, not a sweeping vision for posterity. Simply a compilation of reflections, of personal insights, of hard-won wisdom. But it was honest, it was heartfelt, and it was the best he could offer. Again, he closed his eyes, now without trepidation. No longer did he see the battlefield, the faces of the captive children, or his son's insolent gaze. Instead, he envisioned a field of wheat, swaying gently in the zephyr, golden and ripe for harvest. He saw the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the firmament with streaks of crimson and amethyst. He saw the countenances of his forebears, their eyes radiating pride and solace. He was not without fault. He had erred. He had failed in numerous ways. But he had also endeavored to do good, to serve his people, to uphold the tenets of rectitude and rationale. And that, he knew, sufficed. He opened his eyes, a delicate smile gracing his lips. The stylus felt lighter now, the burden of years eased from his spirit. Accomplishments were many, failures abundant, yet he had learned from his trials, grown more resilient, more sagacious, more merciful. He was ready to meet whatever destiny held, with courage, humility, and the unwavering faith that even in the darkest hours, virtue might yet triumph. He plunged the stylus back into the wax, prepared to confront the next untouched page. Much remained unsaid. Much, much more. And time, he knew, was running away. The city's reflection. The sinking sun stabbed long shadows from the imperial heights, painting skeletal fingers across the sprawling Roman canvas. Marcus inhaled the evening air on the balcony, its brisk bite a welcome contrast to the roiling disquiet within. The city sighed below, a teeming, clamorous organism of travertine and flesh, of aspiration and ruin. His for decades, both a beloved obligation and an inexhaustible wellspring of pride laced with sharp disappointment. He rested against the cool marble, the day's weighty affairs of state receding, though never fully banished. Appeals, verdicts, endless parleys, each a strand in the skein that bound him to this dominion. He had labored ceaselessly to unravel that skein, to ease its constriction wherever possible, yet some knots proved too stubborn, too deeply interwoven within the societal fabric. His gaze drifted across the rooftops, an undulating expanse of russet tiles punctuated by the gleaming alabaster of temples and civic structures. Wisps of smoke curled skyward from countless hearths, carrying aloft the aromas of suppers cooking, exotic spices carried on eastern winds, and the ever-present tang of refuse and humanity's ceaseless industry. The urban chorus rose in a vibrant swell, the grinding of cartwheels, the hawkers' cries, the boisterous laughter and heated arguments of its teeming denizens. He saw within that sprawling vista, a mirror to his own spirit. A blend of majesty and squalor, of lofty ideals and base instincts. He had yearned to forge a city of virtue, a shining exemplar of justice and reason, but reality proved far more intricate. Corruption festered like a hidden canker, ambition often eclipsed honor, and the pursuit of pleasure frequently overshadowed the quest for wisdom. He focused on a group of children in a dusty square below, their uninhibited peals of laughter momentarily piercing the gloom that clung to his thoughts. Oblivious to the Senate's machinations, the threats along distant borders, the philosophical inquiries that preoccupied his waking hours, they existed purely in the present, unburdened by history or anxieties about what was yet to come. He felt a pang of envy. Yet even in their innocent play, he glimpsed a microcosm of Rome's inherent failings. One boy, larger and more assertive, was clearly browbeating the others, seizing their playthings and demanding submission. The smaller, weaker children complied with reluctance, resentment simmering beneath the surface. It was the same narrative, writ large across the empire. The powerful preying on the vulnerable, the affluent grinding down the impoverished, the strong imposing their will upon those less able to resist. He had striven to alleviate these inequities, to shield the defenseless and champion the principles of law and equity, yet he was acutely aware that his efforts often fell short. The decay ran too deep, the system was too firmly entrenched. A solitary figure detached itself from the shadows of a nearby building, a beggar, his garments ragged and his face etched with the sharp angles of starvation. He shuffled down the thoroughfare, hand outstretched, begging for sustenance. Most passers-by ignored him, their eyes averted, their hearts calloused by indifference. Marcus felt a sharp stab of conscience. He possessed immeasurable wealth and authority, yet he could not possibly ameliorate the suffering of every mendicant in Rome. He could not eradicate penury, eliminate all injustice, or reshape human nature. He was but one man, burdened by the dominion's vast weight, striving to navigate a landscape riddled with moral ambiguities. He thought of Commodus. His son, his heir, Rome's future. That thought settled upon him with crushing weight, a burden surpassing any imperial edict. He had endeavored to instill in Commodus the virtues of Stoicism, the principles of fairness and compassion, but with limited success. Commodus was impetuous, hedonistic, and easily influenced by sycophancy and vice. He closed his eyes, briefly yielding to despair. Was all his labor futile? Would Rome descend into turmoil and oppression under Commodus's reign? Would his legacy be one of disappointment and remorse? He drew a deep breath, forcing himself to confront his anxieties. He could not dictate the future. He could not alter Commodus's temperament. He could only govern his own conduct, his own thoughts, his own dedication to virtue. He opened his eyes, his gaze returning to the city below. He saw not a flawless ideal, but a marred and imperfect reality. A city of contrasts, of splendor and squalor, of aspiration and despair. Yet it was his city, his responsibility. And he would continue to serve it, to the utmost of his capabilities, for the duration of his life. He noticed a sudden flurry of activity near the temple of Jupiter. A small blaze had ignited, its tendrils licking at the fluted columns. People were rushing toward the scene, bearing vessels of water, their expressions etched with worry. Even in its magnificence, Rome was susceptible. Vulnerable to misfortune, prone to calamities, perpetually teetering on the precipice of chaos. It was a delicate balance, reliant on the collective dedication of its populace, the wisdom of its rulers, and the fickle whims of destiny. He watched as the conflagration was extinguished, the flames subdued, the threat averted. A collective exhalation of relief seemed to ripple through the assembled throng. Life would continue. The city would endure. He understood that his calling was not to forge a perfect Rome, but to safeguard what already existed. To shield it from its adversaries, both internal and external. To steer it through its trials, to temper its flaws, and to secure its survival for generations yet unborn. He would accept Rome as it was. With all its shortcomings, its contradictions, its intrinsic limitations. He would not judge it, condemn it, or despair of it. He would simply embrace it, with the same detached fortitude a Stoic embraces reality. A cool current of air swept across the veranda, ruffling his toga and conveying the scent of impending rain. The heavens above were dimming, the stars beginning to emerge like diamonds scattered on black velvet. The cityscape twinkled below, a myriad of tiny sparks offering solace in the encroaching shadows. A sense of serenity washed over him, a quiet resignation to his fate. He had done his best. He had strived to live an honorable life. He had served Rome with integrity and distinction. He could ask for nothing further. He turned from the balcony, his thoughts turning towards his writing. He still had work to do, still had lessons to impart. The meditations were far from complete. As he re-entered the palace, he carried with him the image of the city, not as he wished it to be, but as it truly was. A complex, flawed, and ultimately resilient testament to the human condition. The final meditation. The relentless hammering on the roof had waned, the storm finally yielding to a listless sprinkle. For hours, the rain's tempest had mirrored the tempest within Marcus, a furious deluge engulfing the marble city. Now, fissures of light pierced the clouds, a tentative moonbeam gracing his chamber. He set down the stylus, the wax tablet cool against his palm. The pronouncements he'd grappled with, tenets of fairness, appeals to moderation, warnings against profligacy, now seemed flimsy, inadequate bulwarks against the impending darkness. Commodus. The name resonated in the stillness, a jarring note amidst the harmony he yearned for. A familiar protest sang from his joints as he levered himself from the chair. The hearth embers glowed low, stretching elongated, wavering specters across the room. He crossed to the window, wrenching the shutters open to inhale the rain-purified air. Fresher now, keener, bearing the perfume of soaked earth and faraway blossoms. Rome stretched before him, muted, a sprawling panorama of tiled roofs, imposing temples, grand avenues, and soaring aqueducts. He had trod those paths countless times, felt the city's vibrant thrum beneath his feet, heard the clamor of the forum's crowds. He had cherished this city, bled for it, sacrificed personal contentment for its prosperity. And now, a chilling detachment washed over him, as though he were a phantom already, observing the living world from a distant vantage. The moon ascended, its luminosity bathing the gardens below. He discerned the slender cypress trees swaying softly in the breeze, their somber forms stark against the pale palace stones. Even in the stillness of the hour, a sense of vitality persisted, of growth and decay, the unceasing rhythm of existence. Annius Verus came to mind, his grandfather, the font of his stoic principles. He pictured their strolls through the gardens of his youth, the old man illustrating the fleeting beauty of a blossom, the resilience of a tree weathered by gales. Nothing endures, Marcus, he'd rasped, his voice etched with age. All returns to dust. The wise soul embraces this, finding solace in the present. In his youthful ambition and hunger for power, such insight had eluded him. But now, poised on the edge of mortality, those words resonated with startling clarity. He had pursued glory, strived for excellence, wrestled with the empire's weight. Yet, none of it held consequence against the unavoidable. He turned from the window, his gaze settling upon the bust of Faustina, his cherished wife. Her placid countenance, captured in marble, offered a silent reassurance. His love for her had been profound, her passing leaving an unfillable chasm in his existence. Yet, even amidst the grief, he discovered comfort in the knowledge that their love, though brief, had been genuine, a radiant ember in the gloom. He returned to his desk, retrieving the stylus. The wax tablet felt smooth and cool. He dipped the stylus, and began to inscribe, not of edicts or laws, but of the ephemeral nature of all. He wrote of the spectacle of a sunset, the way hues bled across the firmament, transforming the common vista into a transient masterpiece. He wrote of the gossamer frailty of a butterfly's wing, the intricate design, its brief flight. He wrote of the ocean's might, its relentless surge and retreat, its capacity for creation and annihilation. He wrote of the transient nature of life, the way we are born, live, and perish, our bodies dissolving back into the earth. He wrote of the vanity of clinging to influence, to riches, to renown, knowing their ultimate insignificance before eternity. Yet, he also wrote of virtue's enduring power, the significance of living with integrity, kindness, and empathy. He wrote of our duty to treat others with dignity, to act justly, to strive for the common good. For even though our time is fleeting, our actions can ripple outwards, leaving an enduring mark. He wrote of accepting the uncontrollable, of finding tranquility in the present, of cherishing the beauty encircling us, even amidst tribulation. Life is a gift, he penned, a cherished and fleeting opportunity to experience the universe's wonders. He continued until dawn's first tendrils reached through the window, painting the sky with rose and gold. The city below stirred, the everyday noises rising in a gentle chorus. He set down the stylus, his hand aching. Gazing at the tablet, a sense of serenity filled him, absent for years. He knew he couldn't alter the future, guarantee Rome's security, or dictate his son's deeds. But he held dominion over his thoughts, his actions, his responses to the trials ahead. He would continue serving Rome, to his fullest capacity, for as long as he was able. He would endeavor to embody virtue, setting a standard for others. And he would meet whatever fate held, knowing that even in death, peace could be found. He arose, his body stiff but his spirit collected. He moved to the window, observing the sun ascend, bathing the city in its golden embrace. He closed his eyes, inhaling the crisp morning air. He was prepared. The day unfolded in familiar fashion, with the endless stream of petitioners and advisors seeking his wisdom. He listened patiently, offering guidance with a composure that concealed the inner turmoil. He conferred with his generals, addressing conflicts along the empire's borders, offering strategies and reassurance. He signed decrees, ratified accords, and dispensed impartial justice. Yet, beneath these official duties, a profound transformation had occurred. The world's weight no longer pressed upon him, the crushing responsibility that had haunted him for so long. He had acknowledged his limits, embraced the impermanence of all things, and discovered liberation in relinquishing control. He spent the afternoon in the gardens, wandering amongst the flora, observing nature's delicate nuances with fresh eyes. He watched a bee flitting among blossoms, collecting nectar, marveling at life's exquisite balance. He sat beneath an ancient oak, listening to the leaves rustling, feeling a profound connection to the earth. Later, he summoned Commodus. His son arrived with a swagger, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Marcus had grown accustomed to the animosity radiating from him, a constant reminder of his failings as a father. "You requested my presence, father?" Commodus inquired, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Marcus nodded, gesturing for him to sit. Commodus hesitated, then reluctantly perched upon a stool. "I have been contemplating Rome's future," Marcus began, his voice steady. "And your part in it?" Commodus shifted uncomfortably. "I am your son," he stated, defensively. "It is my birthright to rule." "Right is earned, not bestowed," Marcus countered, his gaze firm. "The throne is not a prize, but a burden." He paused, scrutinizing his son's face. He detected a flicker of defiance, an obstinate refusal to acknowledge the truth. "I know you don't share my values," Marcus continued. "That you do not grasp the Stoic tenets. But I implore you, for Rome's sake, to consider your actions' consequences." He emphasized justice, moderation, and compassion. He spoke of protecting the vulnerable, defending the weak, upholding the empire's laws. Commodus listened silently, his expression a mask. When Marcus concluded, he stood, resentment blazing in his eyes. "I will rule as I choose," he stated, coldly. "Rome will be mine." He turned and stalked out, leaving Marcus alone. Marcus sighed, shutting his eyes. He had done all he could. He had sown wisdom seeds, but their germination was beyond his control. He returned to his desk, retrieving the tablet. He dipped the stylus, adding one final thought to his reflection. "The one thing we truly govern is our own character," he inscribed. "Let us strive for virtue, even amidst adversity. For in the end, that alone endures." Dawn's resolve. The sentence lingered, weightless yet potent, hovering not on vellum but within the silent theater of his mind. He revisited it, a well-worn habit, each reading unveiling subtle nuances, hidden tones within the carefully constructed phrase. "To live each day as thy last, yet plan as if eternity stretched before thee. Therein lies equilibrium, the dance of insight." He set down the stylus, the cool ivory a stark contrast to his fevered skin. The wax tablet, a repository of decades of observation, rumination, exhortation, his self-admonishments, felt strangely burdensome. Not physically, but with the accrued weight of obligation, of aspiration, and a submerged dread, recently resurfaced. A knot of pine crackled in the hearth, painting the walls of his sanctuary with flickering geometries. The air, ordinarily a balm of fragrant cypress and melted wax, offered scant comfort this night. He closed the tablet, the muted click echoing in the stillness, a symbolic conclusion, a preparation for the impending finale. A deep-seated conviction settled within him, his sands were dwindling. The fevers had returned with renewed intensity, leaving him spent. The healers spoke of treatments, but their eyes betrayed a silent decree of fate. Marcus gently placed the tablet on the bedside table, a bequest for Commodus, though he doubted his son would glean solace or direction from its pages. He had striven, genuinely striven, to instill in him the virtues of restraint, rectitude, valor, and understanding. Yet the boy, now a man, gravitated towards the allure of dominance, the intoxicating wine of flattery, the ephemeral pleasures of the senses. He sighed, a protracted expulsion of breath, laden with the world's sorrow, a burden he had borne for so long, leadership, the weight of Rome. And soon, that weight would be lifted. But not yet. He hauled himself from the cot, his joints composing a symphony of complaint. Each movement was deliberate, a testament to willpower. The weakness was undeniable, but he refused to yield. Duty remained. He crossed to the window, his bare feet whispering on the chilled flagstones. A sliver of dawn painted the eastern horizon, a delicate wash of pearl and rose. The world slumbered, yet he sensed the city's nascent stirrings, the murmur of life awakening. He beheld the sprawling metropolis, the empire's heart, the world's epicenter. He could almost perceive its pulse, the tapestry of hopes and fears of its countless souls. A vibrant, tumultuous, magnificent, and terrifying entity, for which he had been shepherd. He reflected on the multitude of choices made, campaigns waged, laws enacted. On the men he had elevated, the adversaries subdued, the alliances forged. On triumphs and setbacks, periods of both glory and grief. Throughout, he had sought to remain steadfast to his convictions, to the tenets of Epictetus and Antoninus. To govern with equity and kindness, to lead by example, to be a worthy custodian of Rome. He knew he had fallen short at times. Missteps were made, temptations indulged, judgment clouded by emotion. But the constant endeavor was to improve, to learn from transgression, to cultivate wisdom. The sky brightened, darkness retreating. First light sliced through the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the cityscape. He watched as illumination touched rooftops, temples, monuments, transmuting the familiar into something fresh and luminous. A jolt of vitality surged through him, an invigorated purpose. The weakness ebbed, the aches diminished. He drew a deep breath, inhaling the crisp morning air. He was prepared. He turned from the window and approached the basin on a nearby stand. He splashed frigid water on his face, the shock sharpening his senses. He dried himself with linen, then reached for the unadorned woolen tunic draped over a chair. As he dressed, he contemplated the day ahead. Audiences awaited, petitions required adjudication, decisions demanded resolution. Generals sought directives, senators craved counsel, merchants pleaded for favor. Commodus would likely attend some of these gatherings, lurking, observing, or, more realistically, plotting. A wave of melancholy washed over Marcus, a profound regret. He desperately wished his son were different, possessed of the qualities necessary to govern. But wishing was futile. He could not reshape Commodus, only accept him. His only recourse was to brace Rome for the inevitable. He completed dressing and walked to the door, pausing, hand on the latch. He cast one last glance back at the room, the simple cot, the wax tablet, the smoldering embers. A haven, a refuge from the world's clamor. He would miss its solace. But he could not tarry. Work called, duty beckoned. He opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The palace was awakening, the sounds of servants preparing for the day reverberating through the halls. He walked with firm steps, head held high, his expression resolute. He silently repeated the words of Epictetus, that which lies within our power is naturally free, unrestrained, unobstructed. That which is beyond our power is weak, dependent, restricted, alien. He could not direct the future, could not mold Commodus, not even control his own mortality. Yet, his thoughts, actions, choices remained his domain. He could choose to live with integrity, bravery, and insight. Face whatever came with composure and resolve. And that sufficed. He reached the main hall, where his personal guard stood in rigid formation. They acknowledged him with solemn nods as he approached. He returned the gesture and proceeded to the entrance, where his litter awaited. As he entered, he looked skyward. The sun was now fully ascendant, bathing the city in gold. A new day, a fresh start. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, a sense of tranquility washing over him. He was ready for whatever lay ahead, whatever life or death might offer. The litter lurched forward, carrying him towards the heart of the city, the seat of his power, the locus of his responsibility. He opened his eyes and gazed out, his stare unwavering. He was Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome. And he would confront this day, as he had all others, with valor, wisdom, and equanimity. He had exhausted all means to his disposal and would continue to until his final breath. He carried no regrets, only unwavering determination. Now, he realized his lasting testament would not be the empire he bequeathed, but the paradigm he established, the principles by which he lived, the values he championed. He had guided Rome and would now guide his soul.